was an attractive single mom looking for Mr. Right.
She wanted to be in a real relationship just like any other human being.
He promised to fulfill her every fantasy.
He talked about doing things in the bedroom that simply cannot be repeated, but that's what appealed to her.
But just as their passions reached stratospheric heights, tragedy struck.
She said, Mommy's dead. Something happened to Mama.
There was blood all over the bed. There was blood spatter on the wall.
The ensuing investigation would expose a closet full of dirty laundry and a secret so incendiary, some wondered if this murder was justified.
Past week, I've been a dead man walking. How could she possibly do this to somebody?
The whole country ended up chiming in. Everybody was divided.
It was so heartbreaking to hear national radio personalities say, I would have done the same thing too.
Why me? Why me?
She should have told it from the beginning. I think the driving force in his action was
September 6, 2012. It's a warm fall afternoon in the historic Dallas neighborhood of Oak Cliff. Two young siblings are walking home from school, but they have no idea the horror that's waiting for them.
They came home from school just like they did every day. They walk through the door and they're calling their mother.
Mom, where are you?
And she doesn't answer.
Opening the bedroom door, they are greeted by a horrifying sight.
When the children saw their mother lying down, they walk over to her and they noticed that there was blood on her neck.
They immediately started screaming and crying, so they ran to the neighbor's house.
Moments later, Dallas emergency dispatchers receive a call.
Dallas 323.
Come back here, something's wrong.
What is wrong?
Ma'am, I just know my neighbor kids just came home and found their mother on the floor laid down in a pool of blood.
First responders rush into the bedroom, but sadly, it's much too late. The woman, 28-year-old Cecily Bolden, is already dead. It's clear to EMTs this is no accident.
181. We have a stabbing. DOA. Start homicide unit, please.
Cecily Bolden died from 2 stab wounds to the neck. There was 1 stab wound that severed her carotid artery.
She sat there and actually drowned in her own blood.
As news of the tragedy rips through the apartment complex, it seems impossible to believe that someone would want to brutally murder this beautiful young mother of 2.
I just didn't know what to think at the time. I was upset. I was frustrated.
But as the investigation into Cecily's death unfolds, it becomes clear that she harbored a deep secret, one that may have cost her her life. Born in 1984 and raised by 2 hardworking parents, Cecily Bolden demonstrated a fiercely independent streak from an early age.
Cecily was very much headstrong, firecracker, stood on her own ground, did what she wanted to do. She was very much so interested in living life her way.
After high school, Cecily became a certified nursing assistant in Dallas. But friends and family said her true passion lay elsewhere.
She really wanted to be a hairdresser because that's all she ever did was hair, braiding.
She was always braiding hair for her friends and her friends' kids. She ultimately wanted to open her own beauty salon.
But Cecily's dream took a backseat to reality when at 19, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Bethany. While her relationship with Bethany's father didn't last, Cecily soon found someone to take his place. A charismatic Dallas DJ named Jeff Busby.
In the city, they know him as DJ Frost.
Yeah, we started out being really flirty with each other. It took off from there. We started dating and hanging out a lot.
Despite an 11-year age difference, 22-year-old Cecily and 33-year-old Jeff wasted no time moving in together. It wasn't long before the couple welcomed another child into the world, son Gerald. It was in motherhood that Cecily found her true calling.
She was very devoted to her children and making sure that her children had the best life that she could possibly offer them.
Cecily's driving force was her children, period. And she loved kids and kids loved her.
But after 2 years together, Cecily and Jeff realized their relationship wasn't built for the long haul.
We just didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. We just chose to go in different directions, but we stayed cool with each other.
For a woman blessed with a fiery personality and a knockout body, Cecily had no trouble hopping back into the Dallas dating scene.
It was hot. She was all that. My sister was thick. You know, she had the booty, you know, everything that guys like.
Cecily might have had her pick of potential boyfriends, but over the next few years, she kissed her fair share of frogs. By the time she turned 28, Cecily still hadn't found her Prince Charming.
Cecily did go through a rough patch. We live in the real world. And no, her choices always weren't the best.
A couple of the guys she dated were a little questionable. I wasn't too fond of course, and didn't want around the kids.
Worst of all, some of Cecily's boyfriends were allegedly violent with her.
There were several domestic violence cases against her ex-boyfriends.
She had been abused in the past, so she definitely had some things to be concerned about.
But through it all, Cecily never gave up hope on finding true love.
She was really looking for someone to love her and to offer her probably what she envisioned as, you know, the very best relationship that she could have.
Those dreams seemed to finally come true in August of 2012, when Cecily met 36-year-old Larry Dunn in an online chat room.
It was pretty innocent. You know, they started flirting, and then one thing kind of led to another.
I think that she just was seeking love and attention, and he was willing to shower her with that.
A charismatic and successful furniture mover in Dallas, it didn't take long for Larry to sweep Cecily off her feet.
There was definitely an attraction there, and it wasn't long before things moved from the virtual world to the real world.
Unlike some of the other men Cecily had recently dated, Larry treated her and her kids with warmth and tenderness.
She felt that he loved her, that he wanted to help her take care of the children, that he really wanted to be in a committed relationship with her.
Though they had only known each other for a few weeks, their physical chemistry was undeniable.
Their relationship turned sexual just like that. It was hot, it was sexy, it was intense, and they fulfilled each other's every desire.
But just when it seemed their love for one another had never burned brighter, tragedy struck. As investigators arrive at Cecily's apartment, their first objective is to secure the crime scene. Second, they are faced with the terrible task of speaking with Cecily's children about their gruesome discovery.
Aside from losing their mother and the tragedy of that, they walked in and saw their mother lying dead in a pool of blood. I mean, that's horribly traumatic for a child.
But the burning question on everyone's mind is who could have murdered this mother of two in cold blood? 28-year-old single mother Cecily Bolden dreamed of being in a committed, loving relationship. After years of heartache and disappointment, her love life took an uplifting turn when she met 36-year-old furniture mover Larry Dunn.
Larry appeared to embody everything that Cecily was looking for: love, devotion, companionship.
But Cecily and Larry's love connection was severed on September 6, 2012, when she was found stabbed to death inside her Dallas apartment.
Was this a robbery? Could this have been someone she knew? Who could have done this to her?
And while there's no sign of the murder weapon, the cause of death is clear.
What led to Cecily Bolden's death was a stab wound to the carotid artery, and she pretty much just bled out.
There was a lot of blood on the bed. There was some blood spatter on the wall. It was a fatal blow right away, basically.
As investigators continue processing the gruesome scene, news of Cecily's death reaches friends and family.
I got the phone call from the kids, and they were hysterical. They were crying and screaming, and I asked what's going on, and she told me Mommy's dead. Something happened to Mama.
My little cousin told me that someone done killed your sister, and I'm like, what? I'm like, Dad, don't come over here playing like that. You know, he's like, nah, man, I'm for real, your sister dead.
Grieving friends and family, along with Cecily's two children, gather outside her apartment. Everyone, including police, is desperate for answers. But at this point, investigators can only speculate as to a possible motive.
I didn't know what to think. Maybe somebody broke in, somebody done jumped on her.
Interviewing neighbors, it's a theory that quickly gains traction.
Someone had broken into her house 2 days prior to the murder. So the speculation was whomever broke into the house had returned to finish the job.
Was it possible the same individual had violently attacked Cecily in some sort of robbery gone wrong? Speaking to neighbors, investigators discovered that Cecily had a reputation in the community for keeping cash inside her apartment, which gives the deadly robbery theory even more traction.
Cecily sold candy and snacks from her apartment just to raise a little extra money. She may have had large sums of money at her apartment.
Everyone knew that Cecily Bolden was the candy lady of the neighborhood. That's a potential motive.
People is struggling out here. And in this city, your door will get kicked down if they feel like you making money like that.
But as detectives scour the scene, they soon realize there's a problem with the robbery theory.
There was no broken windows, the door wasn't kicked in.
Nothing stolen, not a dime took. Had every penny that was in her candy jar, had every dollar. No, it wasn't no robbery.
But if robbery isn't the motive, then investigators are presented with an even more chilling possibility that Cecily knew her attacker.
It seemed like she knew her attacker because the way she was found. Nothing with a t-shirt on. It's like she was prepared for someone.
Half naked, on the floor, no forced entry. But yeah, she knew whoever was in there. Real good.
Working from the assumption that Cecily knew her attacker, police dig into her personal records for clues.
Police started looking into her cell phone, text messages, and they came across the name Larry Dunn.
Police tracked down Larry and asked him to come to the station for an interview.
Like I told you over the phone and in person, there's been an incident, and that's why I wanted to talk to you, okay? But
what is this?
It's then that investigators break the news about Cecily's murder.
She was found dead in her apartment, and we're working out.
Oh, God.
You know, we're treating it as a murder right now.
Oh, God.
He was definitely upset by the news.
And while Larry freely admits he and Cecily's romance was red hot, he claims their passion never boiled over into physical violence.
And y'all never gotten into any kind of arguments or fights or...
No, I mean, argument and fight for what?
Larry is adamant that he's innocent of any crime and insists that he was nowhere near Cecily's house at the time of the murder. Detectives are still suspicious. They run a background check on Larry, but find nothing that indicates he is capable of physical violence.
He'd been arrested for a few minor misdemeanors, nothing serious, and especially nothing violent.
It takes a really cold-hearted individual to stab to death a mother of 2 children. It just didn't seem like somebody that would just go out and murder a person.
In addition, the physical evidence doesn't seem to tie Larry to the scene in any way.
There were a lot of pictures taken of Larry Dunn. He didn't have any cuts on his hands, anything like that.
Larry is tentatively cleared of any wrongdoing. Still searching for Cecily's killer, investigators turn to a friend of Cecily's named LaToya Arnett.
They found LaToya Arnett, the person who made the 911 call, and they brought her down to the station to give a statement.
It's a move that quickly pays dividends. LaToya tells police that approximately 3 hours before Cecily's body was discovered, she saw an unknown man enter Cecily's apartment.
It was a black male I never seen before.
Describe him to me.
He was probably about
Black
five.
man?
Black man. He was probably about 5'6".
Whether the man knew Cecily was unclear to LaToya, but she claims he obviously felt comfortable enough to enter the apartment unannounced.
He just walked in. He twisted the doorknob and walked in. And I felt like that was kind of strange.
Detectives can't help but wonder if this mystery man might have been Cecily's boyfriend, Larry Dunn.
You ever heard the name Larry?
My cousin told me Cecily said that she started talking to somebody named Larry.
Okay. But you
That's
never
the
met him?
I never met him.
Was it Larry Dunn that LaToya Arnett saw entering Cecily's apartment the morning of the murder? Detectives create a photo lineup to see if LaToya recognizes Larry as the mystery man.
Is this the person you saw walk into Cecily's apartment today?
With LaToya unable to identify Larry Dunn as the mystery man, detectives move on to another potential suspect, Cecily's ex-boyfriend, Jeff Busby.
They had a long history. They had a roller coaster relationship. Could he have been jealous? Could he have acted in a fit of rage? It's possible.
Possible, but according to investigators, not likely.
Jeff Busby's alibi checked out. Jeff and Cecily were on good terms. It became pretty clear to police investigators. Jeff Busby did not commit this crime.
We remained close. That was one of my best friends.
But digging further into Cecily's romantic background, investigators discover that in between dating Jeff Busby and Larry Dunn, Cecily was involved with several other men. And more than one of these relationships raises serious red flags.
She filed domestic violence charges for violence against herself and her children.
For detectives, it's a stunning turn of events. Could one of these former flames have found out about Cecily and Larry's red-hot romance and flew into a jealous rage? As police begin peeling back the layers of Cecily's life, they have no idea the skeletons they are about to uncover. It's been 6 hours since 28-year-old Dallas resident Cecily Bolden was found stabbed to death inside her apartment. After dismissing robbery as a motive, investigators shifted their focus to Cecily's new love interest, 36-year-old Larry Dunn. But with no evidence connecting Larry to the crime, investigators are at a loss. And with cops still on the lookout for a mystery man seen entering Cecily's apartment shortly before her death, time is of the essence.
And we need to find out who this person is.
Desperate for a lead, investigators decide to shine a spotlight on Cecily's roller coaster love life.
Detectives ran a background check on Cecily and learned that there were several domestic violence cases against her ex-boyfriends.
I don't know if it was that the pickings were slim, but Cecily sometimes didn't make the very best choices in men.
When detectives start investigating the former men in Cecily's life, they uncover a slew of potential suspects.
Police investigators looked at Cecily's ex-boyfriends, several of whom had a violent history with her.
But one of Cecily's violent ex-boyfriends stands out above the rest.
He was fighting on her. He used to hit her. That's just the kind of guy he was. He would fight on women all the time.
The man's name is Rex, and apparently Rex's rage wasn't reserved solely for Cecily. Her friends recount an incident that took place in 2006 involving her beloved 2-year-old son, Gerald.
Her boyfriend was watching him one day while she was at work, and we got a call from the hospital. The doctor said that he'd been punched and kicked.
When Cecily saw what happened, she was devastated. She was really devastated.
Cecily never forgave Rex for hurting her son and soon ended their relationship. In light of their volatile history, police can't help but wonder if Rex might have dropped by Cecily's apartment unannounced, which in turn triggered a violent confrontation.
Nothing sets a mother off quicker than someone trying to abuse her child. So if one of her exes did show up, Cecily may have become enraged.
But no sooner do investigators think they have a promising new lead than they hit a brick wall. Pulling the ex-couple's case file, they learn Rex is currently serving time on charges related to the child abuse incident against Cecily's son.
He ended up finally getting caught, and he got sentenced to like 20 to 25 years.
It's a disappointing setback. But Rex is not the only ex-boyfriend whose violent past raises eyebrows. Detectives come across another man from Cecily's past, Michael Walker, a man who was even more despised by Cecily's family than Rex.
If he ain't in jail, he need to be in jail. Praise God for him that I haven't seen him. Little leprechaun-looking mother.
What you mean I need to back up?
You're not coming in here. You need to back up.
I damn near take care of all the bills in this house. What you mean I need to back up?
You don't take care of nothing.
What you mean?
No, you are not coming in here. No. You need to leave.
That he had been abusive toward her in the past. He had broken her car window.
Cecily's family claims the abuse escalated after she broke up with Michael in early 2011, just months before her murder.
Bye. Cecily, what?
He was mad, he harassed and threatened her, he kicked her vehicle, Then he told her, "You better invest in some protection."
Had Michael Walker followed through on his threat and killed Cecily in a jealous rage?
Sometimes people can't accept when an ex has moved on. The jealousy of a former lover can take someone who is otherwise perfectly rational and make them snap.
Police put out an APB on Michael Walker, then once again turned to the one person who might help them tie Michael to the scene once and for all: Cecily's neighbor, LaToya Arnett.
She told police she saw a man walking into Cecily's apartment the day of the murder.
Could Michael Walker be the mystery intruder LaToya saw on that fateful day? Or is there another, even more dangerous man in Cecily's life? One who wouldn't stop until Cecily was dead. After enduring years of abusive relationships, Cecily Bolden finally felt she turned a corner when she met Larry Dunn online. For the single mother of two, Larry represented a chance at true happiness. But after Cecily's discovered dead in her own apartment, police find themselves staring at a rogues gallery of volatile ex-boyfriends, any one of whom could have killed Cecily.
A couple of the guys she dated were a little questionable, but I mean, I was questionable too, so I can't, pass judgment on nobody.
But after learning about a series of disturbing events that took place the year before, police have their sights set on one man, an old flame of Cecily's named Michael Walker.
Michael had allegedly threatened Cecily Bolden by leaving harassing messages and allegedly threatening her life. So he was a prime suspect.
But with Michael Walker's whereabouts unknown, detectives have no choice but to turn to their next best option: Cecily's neighbor, LaToya Arnett. In her initial statement, LaToya claimed to have witnessed an unknown black male entering Cecily's apartment just a few hours before the murder. If their hunch is correct, the man LaToya saw that day was Michael Walker.
Have you ever heard Celia talk about an ex-boyfriend?
Michael?
Yes.
It wasn't him. I know how he looked.
Without a doubt, it was
It
not
was
him.
not Michael.
But if the man LaToya saw that day wasn't Michael Walker, then who was it? The only other person of interest that even remotely fits LaToya's description is Larry Dunn. But after their initial interview with Larry, detectives all but ruled him out as a suspect. With no other leads, detectives circle back to Larry Dunn, if only to make doubly sure of his innocence. However, when they arrive at Larry's residence, they make a startling discovery.
Yes, is Larry here?
Larry Dunn was a married man. He had 2 kids.
Here to talk to you about Cecily Bolden.
Who is Cecily?
The fact that Larry Dunn was married at the time adds a whole new layer of complication to this case. It could have been that Larry's wife, catching wind of the affair, decided herself to go after Cecily.
But judging from her reaction, Larry's wife had no idea her husband was carrying on an affair with Cecily Bolden.
Now, did you know her, ma'am? Do you even know who we're talking about? Or
I have
is this...
no idea. This is the first time I'm hearing about this. I've been at home raising kids.
She was absolutely shocked. It was clear she had no idea. So if she had no idea, she had no reason to murder Cecily.
Why don't we go down to the office and talk about it if you have no problems with it?
Look, if it helps, I'll go.
His wife might not have had a motive to murder Cecily, but that doesn't get Larry off the hook for possible murder. Back at the station, Larry quickly confesses to one thing. This wasn't the first time he'd cheated on his wife.
It was pretty common for Larry to cheat on his wife. Larry would meet women on chat lines and they would exchange phone numbers.
You got 5, 6, 7 women that you dealing with.
It seems Cecily wasn't the love of Larry's life so much as his latest sexual conquest.
He wasn't looking for a relationship. He wasn't looking to leave his wife. He just wanted to have extramarital sex. So she thought she was hooking up with somebody that was single. She had no idea he was married. He never told her.
Me and Cecily, I was around on my wife.
So y'all been having sex for 2 weeks, 3 weeks? What?
We had sex like 3 times.
While Larry comes clean about his infidelity, he maintains he had nothing to do with Cecily's murder. Though Larry does admit that he did have sex with Cecily the morning of the crime.
I called her like, look, if I don't want to come through, I want some. She's like, come on. I went over there.
He said he went there, they had sex, and he left. When he left, she was fine. She said bye, he said bye, and he left.
Larry is so adamant about his innocence, he volunteers to let investigators search his car. But when CSIs examine Larry's vehicle, they make a surprising discovery.
Luminol is a substance where you can spray it on blood and it will illuminate it. So that's what they sprayed in the car. And so at that point, they saw that there was quite a bit of blood in there.
Larry's story changed from, I just had sex with her, I don't know anything about a murder, to she killed me, so I killed her.
But what does Larry mean by that cryptic comment? Detectives can hardly believe what Larry says next.
He said that he had killed her because he was in a rage over finding out that she was HIV positive.
He was pretty adamant that he was the victim in this case. There were multiple things going on in his mind, and he blamed her for all of that.
According to Larry, Cecily had failed to disclose that she was HIV positive prior to having sex with him the first time.
For the past week, I've been a dead man walking, and all I could think about was her. And why and how could she possibly do this to somebody?
Right.
Like, why? Why me? You know, why me? And I was hurt, and my mind was going a million miles a second all day since she told me. Every day since she told me.
Adding to Larry's anger was the health risk Cecily's HIV posed for his wife.
Having HIV would have been devastating for him because at that point he's possibly passed it along to his wife.
It seemed as if Larry Dunn had lost it all. He had potentially lost his family. He was potentially going to die from HIV.
I think within the African American community, there is still some stigma surrounding a person being HIV positive. Along with stigma comes isolation, fear, and views of hatred.
Certain he was carrying the HIV virus, Larry thought he might as well enjoy his time with Cecily while he could.
We had already had sex like 4 times.
So you didn't think one more was gonna matter?
Why would it? 4 times. Unprotected with a chick with HIV.
According to Larry, it was after this 4th and final sexual encounter that his anger at Cecily turned to rage.
He said that she began talking about having HIV and she was acting like it wasn't a big deal. He says that just sent him into a rage.
I just lost it, man.
And what did you do?
I went in the kitchen and I got a steak knife.
Did she see the knife in your hand?
No, she didn't see it until it was in her throat.
He wanted her to feel pain, so he stabbed her in her throat and chest area.
The manner of the attack was very brutal. The one who actually killed her is the one that was in her carotid artery.
Larry washed up before he left. He also burned his clothes and he threw the knife in the dumpster.
Based on Larry's confession, detectives are able to locate the murder weapon. They also charge Larry with the murder of Cecily Bolden. But even with Larry in custody, plenty of questions still remain. Not the least of which is whether Larry's actions constituted self-defense.
If she had HIV and she didn't tell him until after the fact, was he justified? After all, this is Texas. And in the court of law, when it comes to defending yourself, anything is possible.
When 28-year-old Cecily Bolden began a heated relationship with Larry Dunn, she thought she'd finally met the man of her dreams. But after a few short weeks, that dream turned into a nightmare when Cecily's children discovered her body in the bedroom of their apartment. After investigating a virtual laundry list of potential suspects, detectives ultimately discovered that not only was Cecily's new boyfriend behind the crime, he was also a married man.
Well, I don't think that she had any idea that he was married.
He had led this double life. He was sleeping around on his wife and successfully doing so for a while.
But perhaps the most shocking aspect of the case was Larry's alleged motive for murdering Cecily.
She knew that she was HIV positive, but she did not initially tell him. I think he felt disrespected and hurt by that. And so it just triggered something in his mind, and he decided that he was going to kill her.
And things only got worse when Cecily allegedly made light of the situation, which pushed Larry over the edge.
It's not that bad.
So you just gonna give me HIV, endanger my life, and pretend like it's okay?
Larry Dunn trusted Cecily Bolden. He had been intimate with her. So perhaps he was feeling betrayed or confused, could not get past what he believed she had done to him.
But as the tawdry details of the case go viral, a surprising number of people come out in support of Larry's actions.
The whole country ended up chiming in on it. A lot of people were like, I would have did the same thing. And then you had the other side of the country, and they're like, nobody should have to die.
It initially was portrayed more as he'd found out that she had HIV and he killed her right then. That's a different scenario than what we had. He knew that she had HIV. It was a week later after that the murder happened. She didn't tell Larry Dunn initially because she just wanted love and acceptance. While she did something wrong, clearly, that doesn't mean that he was justified in killing her.
Then, just weeks before Larry's murder trial is set to begin, a shocking development adds another, even more bizarre twist to the case.
He does not have HIV. He didn't get tested before killing her. He got tested 3 times while he was waiting for trial. They were all negative.
It's under this cloud of scandal and uncertainty that the state versus Larry Dunn gets underway. And despite the fact that Larry isn't HIV positive, many in the courtroom believe his self-defense claim will still win out.
You want to think it was an open shut case because, yeah, the guy confessed to stabbing her. But when you have to throw in that HIV, you're going to have an uphill battle.
Larry Dunn believed that he was justified in killing Cecily Bolden, and he thought that the jurors would agree with him.
From the prosecution's opening statement, their objective is clear: to minimize any sympathy jurors might feel for Larry Dunn.
The strategy was to focus on Larry Dunn's actions, that he was the cheating husband because he would sleep with women without using a condom and then come back and sleep with his wife.
Prosecutors assert that on September 6, 2012, more than a week after learning that Cecily was HIV positive, Larry drove to her home to have unprotected sex with her one last time. On the presumption that he too had contracted the disease, Larry entered Cecily's bedroom, hell-bent on revenge.
I think it was a premeditated attack. He knew exactly what he was doing. He laid down beside her and just stuck the knife right into her neck.
He could have taken steps to get help, to get information about HIV, to find out whether he actually had the virus. But he didn't do that. He went straight to rage.
Prosecutors also cite the physical evidence that ties Larry to the crime scene: the recovered murder weapon, his bloody car, and last but not least, his own confession.
How many times did you stab her?
Twice. I think twice. Whatever's gonna happen really doesn't matter to me, man, because again, in my mind, I'm already dead, bro. I feel like she killed me, so I killed her.
Leaving Larry's own ominous words in the minds of the jury, the prosecution rests its case. But as defense attorneys prepare to call their first witness, an unexpected turn of events rocks the courtroom.
It's very unusual that that would happen. I really didn't think that he...
Inside a Dallas courtroom, Larry Dunn is on trial for the murder of his 28-year-old mistress, Cecily Bolden. Prosecutors have alleged that this self-confessed philanderer intentionally stabbed Cecily to death a week after learning she had exposed him to the HIV virus.
They'd had sex a number of times, and then she decided to tell him. He went over there for revenge, had sex with her again, and killed her.
With prosecutors finished laying out their case, it's now Larry's attorney's turn to launch their defense. But before they even call their first witness, the case veers in an unexpected direction.
He told his defense attorney that he wanted to enter the guilty plea, and I was very surprised by that.
The community was shocked when Larry Dunn entered his guilty plea.
But even after entering a guilty plea, neither Larry nor his attorney is ready to throw in the towel. Their new plan is to establish sympathy for Larry at a different proceeding, his sentencing hearing.
The defense attorney basically didn't want to get up there and argue that he was not guilty when it was so clear that he was. He wanted to save the ammunition that he had to try to get him the lowest sentence he possibly could.
This ammunition takes the form of a legal doctrine known in Texas as the sudden passion defense.
The defendant must prove that he caused the death under the immediate influence of sudden passion. It reduces the offense to a second-degree felony offense.
Normally, the punishment range is 5 years in prison to 99 years in prison. If the jury makes a finding of sudden passion, then it is reduced from 2 years to 20 years.
At question is how much spontaneity, if any, governed Larry's impulse to kill.
You have to be caught in the moment. Sudden passion definitely has a time element. It can't be the result of former provocation.
Taking the stand on his own behalf, Larry reiterates what he told detectives during his confession a year earlier.
He in fact says himself, killing her wasn't on the menu, that's just how it ended up.
He says the more she talked about living with HIV and that it wasn't that bad, the angrier he got.
It's powerful testimony, but according to prosecutors, it doesn't amount to sudden impulse.
This wasn't a sudden passion issue because Larry Dunn had days to reflect on the fact that he had been exposed to HIV. And after he knew that, he went back, had sex with her again, and then decided to kill her.
For prosecutors, there's no better evidence of premeditation than a series of text messages that Cecily and Larry exchanged the days leading up to her murder.
He'd sent her 300 text messages in which they'd kept talking the whole time, including talking about her HIV status. He sent a lot of very graphic sexual text messages. His reaction was, I'm upset, I'm hurt, but it's okay, we'll be together.
According to prosecutors, these text messages prove without a doubt that Larry had been plotting Cecily's murder for days. The argument seems valid, but will the jury go along with it?
There was one juror who did not want to sentence Larry Dunn. We learned that he had an issue with Cecily Bolden, that he felt that Cecily Bolden had disrespected Larry Dunn.
They sent out a note saying that they were hung, and the judge, instead of declaring a mistrial, sent them back to continue deliberating.
On November 5th, 2013, jurors finally reach a unanimous decision. They sentence Larry Dunn to 40 years in prison.
The jury found that Larry Dunn had not acted in sudden passion. Had they done so, it would have reduced his sentence significantly.
My immediate reaction to what he got is good. Larry Dunn received 40 years. All right. Of course, he'll be an old fart when he get out.
Is 40 years enough for what he did? No. I'd have to ask my kids that. They'd probably say no.
And as the years go by, the death of Cecily Bolden has become a cautionary tale about ignorance and prejudice, a tragedy rooted in a lack of awareness about HIV.
I felt like she killed me, so I killed her.
Cecily Bolden was not killed because she was HIV positive. She was killed based on the miseducation and stigma that Larry had about the disease.
I feel like after she told you, you had choices, bro. I mean, after you found out, you had multiple choices. You had to kill her.
If Larry Dunn had felt like Sister Bolden gave him HIV, he could have followed her with the local authorities.
Though nothing can bring Cecily back, it's her loved one's hope that her life will serve as both an inspiration to others living with the disease and as an example of just how deadly ignorance can be.
I want to make sure that the story doesn't go into the distance, that we are active as a community in educating people about HIV, making sure that people know that HIV is not this instant death sentence, so that those fears and stigmas are just not there.
Midnight in Chicago does not sleep. It merely bleeds into the fog that rolls off Lake Michigan, swallowing the neon glare of Michigan Avenue and burying the city's dark secrets beneath a frost-bitten veil. On a bitter December night in 1988, while millions of residents retreated behind locked doors, celebrating the warmth of the holiday season, a monstrous shadow slipped through the alleyways of the West Loop, executing a crime so precise, so brutal, and so terrifyingly silent that it would paralyze the Windy City for nearly 4 decades. For 38 years, the name Julianne Miller was spoken only in hushed, trembling tones across police precincts and newsrooms, a cold case nightmare, an unsolved horror story that became the dark folklore of Cook County. An ambitious 24-year-old corporate accountant with a bright future, a loving family, and not a single known enemy on Earth, vanished from her fortified high-rise apartment without a trace, only to be discovered 3 days later inside a padlocked, abandoned boiler room beneath the freezing floorboards of an industrial warehouse. The scene was an atrocious masterpiece of forensic cleanup. No forced entry, no struggle, no clear weapon, no fingerprints, and a crime scene bathed in chemical solvent that erased every traditional shred of physical proof known to modern law enforcement in the late 20th century. Detectives interrogated hundreds of suspects, dragged the Chicago River, combed through thousands of financial ledgers, and chased ghost-like tips across state lines, only to hit an iron wall of complete, suffocating silence. The killer did not just escape. He faded into the suburban fabric of Midwest America, living a quiet, unassuming life, walking the same crowded streets as his victim's grieving family, confident that the passage of time, the decay of evidence, and the brutal winter of 1988 had washed away his sins forever. But what this phantom did not calculate was that technology evolves, cellular memory never dies, and the microscopic traces left in the dark have a terrifying way of clawing their way back into the light when least expected. To understand the sheer horror that gripped Chicago in the winter of 1988, you must step back onto the damp, slick cobblestones of the West Loop before the high-rise gentrification, back when the neighborhood was a desolate maze of meatpacking plants, silent warehouses, and flickering streetlights drowning in toxic exhaust. On the night of December 14, 1988, Julianne Miller clocked out of her top-floor office at the prestigious LaSalle Street financial firm at precisely 6:45 in the evening. She made her usual stops, a quick purchase at the corner deli, a brief wave to the night doorman at her apartment complex on Huron Street, and a phone call to her mother at 8:15 p.m. to confirm her travel plans for Christmas morning. That 4-minute phone call was the last time anyone ever heard her voice. When she failed to show up for a critical board meeting the following morning at 9 a.m., her colleagues immediately raised the alarm. Julianne was a woman of ironclad routine, punctuality personified, a rising executive who never missed a deadline or left a door unlocked. When Chicago police officers kicked down the heavy oak door of apartment 4B at noon, expecting to find a medical emergency, they stepped into a surreal, haunting scene of pristine domestic tranquility. Her leather purse sat neatly on the kitchen counter. Her keys were resting in the decorative ceramic bowl beside the foyer. Her coat was folded over the entryway chair, and a fresh pot of coffee remained unbrewed beside the sink. There was no sign of a break-in, no scuffled rug, no broken glass, no blood, and no evidence of a struggle whatsoever. It was as if Julianne Miller had simply dissolved into thin air between the living room and the kitchen, swallowed by the very walls of her own apartment. The initial 24 hours triggered one of the most intense, aggressive manhunts in the history of the Chicago Police Department. Search dogs swept the surrounding blocks, sonar teams scanned the murky depths of the Chicago River, and homicide detectives went door to door through every apartment in the building, interviewing neighbors, delivery drivers, utility workers, and ex-boyfriends. Every single lead collapsed into a dead end. Julianne's life was an open book of spotless integrity, no hidden debts, no secret lovers, no workplace rivalries, no dark past. She was a woman who lived by the rules, trusted her environment, and double-locked her doors every single night. Yet, 3 miles away from her pristine apartment, deep in the shadows of an industrial strip off Fulton Market, the nightmare was waiting to be uncovered by a pair of city maintenance workers inspecting an off-grid heating pipe. On the morning of December 17, 1988, workers forced open the rusted padlock of an underground boiler room beneath a vacant textile factory, a dark, concrete cavern accessible only through a narrow service alleyway off Fulton Street. Inside, resting on the frozen gravel floor beneath a maze of copper pipes, lay the body of Julie Ann Miller. The crime scene left seasoned homicide investigators sick to their stomachs. Julie Ann had been bound at the wrists with military-grade tactical cord, her mouth sealed with heavy industrial tape, and her life ended by a single, crushing blow to the base of her skull, followed by meticulous staging that revealed a killer of terrifying composure and clinical detachment. The killer had not panicked. He had stayed with the body for hours in the freezing cold, using industrial-grade bleach and kerosene to scour her clothing, her skin, and the surrounding concrete floor, systematically destroying any hair, fiber, or fluid that could point a finger toward his identity. The medical examiner's report confirmed the police's worst fears. Julie Ann had been targeted with terrifying premeditation. The lack of defensive wounds suggested she was ambushed from behind by someone who possessed total knowledge of her building's security blind spots, someone who knew precisely how to navigate her apartment floor without alerting the doorman or attracting the attention of neighbors in adjacent units. The chemical wash used at the secondary crime scene destroyed almost every conventional forensic clue available to 1988 investigators. Blood typing was inconclusive, hair samples were degraded beyond recovery, and partial shoe prints found in the damp gravel belonged to standard work boots sold at thousands of retail stores across the Midwest. The killer had executed what appeared to be the perfect crime, a silent kidnapping from a secure residential building, a cold-blooded execution in a subterranean industrial vault, and a forensic cleanup so complete that it left the chief of detectives standing before a sea of news cameras, forced to admit that the city was hunting a phantom. As the weeks bled into months, the public panic in Chicago escalated to a fever pitch. Front-page newspaper headlines screamed warnings to suburban residents and city dwellers alike. The West Loop Phantom. NO Safe Haven. IS a serial killer stalking Chicago's high-rises? Locksmiths across the city reported a 6-month backlog as frightened residents installed deadbolts, window bars, and security alarms. Women walked the streets in pairs, looking over their shoulders at every shadow, while local news broadcasts led every night with tearful pleas from Julie Ann's parents, begging anyone with information to step forward. Detectives accumulated over 3,000 pages of investigative files, interviewed more than 400 potential witnesses, and ran background checks on every registered sex offender in the tri-state area. Yet, despite the unprecedented expenditure of manpower and public resources, the investigation slowly ground to a devastating, agonizing halt. The leads dried up, the tips turned to dust, the news cameras eventually moved on to newer tragedies, and the physical evidence was packed into heavy cardboard boxes, sealed with amber tape, and lowered into the dusty, fluorescent-lit depths of the Chicago Police Department's cold case evidence vault. For 38 long years, Julie Ann Miller's case sat in the dark, a silent ghost haunting the conscience of the Cook County justice system. Generations of homicide detectives retired with her crime scene photos framed on their desks, haunted by the unsolved murder that defied every rule of criminal investigation. The case became a legendary brick wall, an impossible puzzle that served as a grim reminder of the limits of 20th century forensic science. The killer was presumed dead, vanished into thin air, or living out his golden years in a peaceful suburban retirement, completely untouched by the law, convinced that his chemical cleanup on Fulton Street had granted him permanent immunity from earthly justice. But while the physical world moved on, while the West Loop transformed from an industrial wasteland into a bustling hub of luxury restaurants and glass skyscrapers, the evidence inside Vault Locker 81 remained frozen in time, waiting for a revolution in human science that would bridge the gap between microscopic cellular debris and absolute judicial truth. The turning point came in late 2025, not through a dramatic confession or a sudden tip from a deathbed informant, but through the quiet, relentless advance of genetic science in a high-security forensic lab in downtown Chicago. Under a newly funded federal cold case task force initiative, senior forensic geneticists pulled the original 1988 evidence boxes out of storage. Among the items preserved in climate-controlled isolation were the victim's dark wool coat, her leather purse, and the original military-grade tactical cord that had been wrapped around her wrists. In 1988, scientists required a blood sample the size of a quarter to generate a primitive DNA profile. In 2025, modern touch DNA and single nucleotide polymorphism microarray profiling allowed geneticists to extract viable cellular material from invisible, microscopic skin cells rubbed off onto a surface decades prior, even after exposure to harsh household chemicals. Using advanced laser-induced fluorescence, forensic scientists scanned the surface of the tactical cord, focusing specifically on the tight inner knots where the killer's fingers would have exerted maximum physical pressure while binding the victim. Hidden deep within the fibers of the woven nylon, sheltered from the bleach spray by the sheer tightness of the knot itself, researchers discovered an astonishing microscopic treasure: 7 nanograms of degraded, yet viable, male skin cells. It was a sample no larger than a speck of dust, invisible to the human eye, preserved in the dark for nearly 4 decades. Utilizing state-of-the-art genetic genealogy protocols, scientists expanded the minute DNA sample into a full genomic profile, uploading the digital code into national public genealogy databases to map out the perpetrator's biological family tree. What the algorithms uncovered shocked even the most veteran cold case investigators. The DNA did not match any known criminal in the combined DNA index system, explaining why the killer had never flagged on traditional law enforcement radar. Instead, the genetic map pinpointed distant second-cousin relationships, leading investigators down a complex, multi-generational ancestral labyrinth that traced back to a prominent, respected Midwest family with deep roots in northern Illinois. Over 6 months of clandestine surveillance, forensic genealogical reconstruction, and meticulous background checks, detectives systematically narrowed the family tree down to a single living individual who matched the precise age, geographical location, and physical profile required by the 1988 timeline. The suspect was not a transient drifter, a notorious street criminal, or a fleeing fugitive hiding under an assumed alias. He was a 71-year-old retired civil engineer and former city building inspector named Arthur Pendleton, a man who lived in an immaculate, manicured suburban home in Naperville, Illinois, surrounded by grandchildren, lawn ornaments, and community service awards. For 38 years, Pendleton had maintained a flawless facade of suburban respectability, serving on local neighborhood boards, attending charity events, and posing as a gentle, pillars of the community elder statesman. His neighbors viewed him as a quiet, harmless old man who spent his afternoons gardening and reading history books, completely oblivious to the fact that the monster who had paralyzed Chicago in the winter of 1988 was living right across the street. The arrest unfolded with cinematic, shockwave intensity on a chilly Tuesday morning in early 2026. Undercover detectives, posing as local delivery workers, shadowed Pendleton as he stepped out of a neighborhood coffee shop, recovering a discarded paper cup from a public recycling bin. Within 48 hours, state crime lab geneticists confirmed an undeniable, absolute match. The touch DNA recovered from the inner knots of the 1988 tactical cord belonged to Arthur Pendleton. The mathematical probability of the DNA belonging to another unrelated male in the global population was calculated at less than 1 in 11 billion. Armed with a high-priority capital arrest warrant, a heavily armed tactical unit swarmed Pendleton's Naperville residence, taking the 71-year-old into custody as he walked down his driveway to retrieve the morning paper. As news of the arrest broke across national news networks, the city of Chicago experienced a collective, paralyzing shockwave. Front-page banner headlines read, "Chicago 1988 Cold Case Closed. Unexpected DNA Match Reveals Perpetrator." The media circus exploded outside the Cook County Criminal Courts building, where reporters from around the world gathered to witness the man who had outrun the law for nearly 4 decades finally step onto the scales of justice. In his initial police interrogation, faced with high-definition genetic mapping diagrams and historical city employment records that proved he had unmonitored master key access to Julianne's building during his time as a city inspector, Pendleton's icy composure broke into jagged, unfixable pieces. The suburban camouflage was stripped away, laying bare the calculating, predatory killer who had used his position of authority to stalk, ambush, and murder an innocent young woman simply because she had uncovered a minor building code discrepancy that threatened his corrupt financial kickback scheme. Now, as the legal machinery grinds forward toward the trial of the century, the lingering ghosts of 1988 are finally being laid to rest. The cold case that defined a generation of fear in the Windy City has reached its ultimate, unshakable conclusion. Time did not wash away the crime. The passage of years did not grant immunity, and the darkness of that Fulton Street boiler room could not hide the truth forever. The microscopic receipt left on a piece of nylon cord survived 38 winters, proving to the world that no matter how clean you scrub the floor, no matter how deep you bury the file, and no matter how long you hide behind a suburban smile, the truth never forgets, and justice always catches up in the end. The winter of 1988 did not merely bring bitter cold to Chicago, it ushered in an era of quiet, suffocating terror that altered the psychological fabric of the city. To understand how a 24-year-old corporate accountant could vanish from a secure high-rise without leaving a single drop of blood or a shattered doorframe, one must dissect the physical architecture of the West Loop during late December of that year. Long before luxury high-rises, artisanal bakeries, and high-tech corporate headquarters redefined the neighborhood, Fulton Market was a dark, industrial labyrinth dominated by cold storage meatpacking facilities, looming brick warehouses, and silent rail spurs that hummed with the vibration of distant freight trains. When night fell, the streets emptied completely, leaving only the biting wind from Lake Michigan sweeping through empty alleyways where steam rose from snow-covered sewer grates. Julianne Miller's apartment building at 412 West Huron Street was considered an oasis of safety in an urban landscape undergoing rapid, uneasy transformation. The building featured a 24-hour doorman, keycard-activated elevators, a novelty in 1988, and heavy double-paned windows designed to seal out the freezing Chicago drafts. On the night of December 14th, Julianne returned home from her office at LaSalle National Bank at 6:45 p.m. The doorman, an elderly retired transit worker named Harold Vance, distinctly remembered her walking through the carpeted lobby, holding a small paper bag from a nearby bakery, offering him a warm smile, and stepping into the elevator. He logged her entry in his leather-bound visitor register, a standard protocol for the building, and noted that nothing seemed amiss. Julianne was dressed in her dark wool winter coat, clutching her leather purse, her mind focused on the impending holiday weekend. Inside apartment 4B, Julianne went through her familiar evening routine. She unlocked her door, hung her coat on the wooden rack in the entryway, placed her keys in the decorative ceramic bowl beside the foyer, and set her purse on the granite kitchen counter. She made a brief phone call to her mother in suburban Arlington Heights at 8:15 p.m., discussing her train schedule for Christmas Eve and confirming she would bring a baked dish for family dinner. Her mother, Martha Miller, later told detectives that Julianne sounded entirely relaxed, upbeat, and engaged. There was no tremor in her voice, no mention of an unexpected visitor, no sound of anyone else in the background, and no indication that she was experiencing any form of distress. That phone call ended at 8:19 p.m. It was the last human interaction Julianne Miller would ever have alive. When Julianne failed to arrive at her 9 o'clock morning meeting at the bank the following day, her immediate supervisor, senior partner Richard Vance, grew instantly concerned. Julianne was responsible for auditing high-value commercial real estate portfolios, a position that demanded absolute precision and punctuality. She had never been late in her 2 years with the firm. By 10:30 a.m., after repeated phone calls to her home landline went unanswered, the firm dispatched an office courier to her apartment building. When the courier arrived, doorman Harold Vance confirmed that Julianne had not walked out through the main lobby that morning. Thinking she might have suffered a sudden medical emergency, the doorman used his master key to open the heavy deadbolt door of apartment Forby alongside 2 responding Chicago police officers from the 12th District. What the officers discovered inside apartment Forby defied every standard trope of a violent home invasion. The apartment was pristine. There was no broken glass, no overturned furniture, no scuffled rug, and no sign of forced entry on the steel door frame or the window locks. Julianne's leather purse sat on the kitchen counter, containing her wallet, for credit cards, and $42 in cash. Her coat remained draped over the chair, her keys were resting in the foyer bowl, and a half-filled mug of water sat beside the kitchen sink. The apartment felt suspended in time, as if its occupant had stepped into another dimension mid-sentence. The only anomaly, a detail so subtle that investigators initially overlooked it, was that the double deadbolt on the front door was unlocked, locked only by the primary latch handle from the inside. The initial 72 hours of the investigation turned into a massive operational undertaking for the Chicago Police Department. Detective Marcus Vance, a seasoned homicide investigator assigned to the Area 4 Detective Division, took charge of the scene alongside his partner, Detective Arthur Pendleton, a meticulous, soft-spoken investigator with an extensive background in civil engineering and municipal building codes who had recently transferred to the Violent Crimes Unit. Together, they launched a floor-by-floor sweep of the 12-story residential building, interviewing all 36 tenants, inspecting the basement storage units, and examining the building's utility shafts. The tenant interviews yielded an unsettling void of information. Neighbors on the 4th floor reported hearing nothing unusual during the late hours of December 14th. The occupant of apartment 4A, a retired schoolteacher who suffered from insomnia and frequently sat up reading late into the night, stated she heard no raised voices, no heavy footsteps, no thuds, and no doors slamming down the hallway corridor. The building's service elevator, located at the rear of the hallway, was restricted to freight use and required a physical key to operate from the interior control panel. Yet, when detectives checked the lock, there were no scratches or signs of tampering. As news of the young accountant's mysterious disappearance broke across the evening news broadcasts, the city watched with bated breath. Channel 5 News led its 6 o'clock bulletin with sweeping aerial shots of the West Loop, flashing Julianne's high school portrait across the screen while reporters stood outside the Huron Street complex under heavy snowfalls. Her family held an emotional press conference on the courthouse steps, her brother weeping into a microphone as he begged anyone with information to come forward. The local business community chipped in to establish a $50,000 reward fund, and police telephone hotlines were flooded with hundreds of tips ranging from reported sightings on interstate highways to claims of psychic visions. Every lead investigated by the task force led directly into a brick wall. Detectives exhaustively analyzed Julianne's personal and professional life. They audited her personal bank accounts, reviewed her tax filings, and interviewed her college friends, former boyfriends, and bank colleagues. Her financial ledgers were immaculate. Her personal relationships were completely devoid of conflict, and her schedule was a transparent book of professional dedication. She did not frequent late-night taverns, she had no history of substance abuse, and she was not involved in any high-risk personal activities. She was, by all accounts, an ideal citizen, a hardworking young professional whose sudden disappearance seemed scientifically impossible given the secure environment from which she had vanished. The narrative took its terrifying, permanent turn on the morning of December 17, 1988, 3 days after Julianne was last heard from. A city maintenance crew from the Department of Water Management had been dispatched to inspect a frozen high-pressure steam line running beneath an abandoned 3-story brick structure on Fulton Street, roughly 3 miles southwest of Julianne's apartment. The building, formerly operated as a cold storage meat processing plant during the mid-20th century, had been vacant for over 5 years, its windows boarded up with heavy plywood, its exterior brickwork covered in faded corporate stencils and winter grime. Access to the subterranean boiler room was located through a narrow, unlit service alleyway off the main street. The heavy steel door leading down to the basement was secured with a massive, rusted master lock padlock that appeared to have been undisturbed for years. However, when one of the utility workers shined his flashlight onto the latch, he noticed that the padlock was not actually engaged through the iron eyelet. It had been carefully rested inside the loop to give the visual illusion of being locked from the street while allowing immediate, unhindered entry to anyone who knew the trick. Pushing open the heavy steel door, the workers descended a flight of crumbling concrete steps into the freezing, pitch-black subterranean cavern. The air inside was heavy with the smell of damp concrete, rusted iron, and mineral oil. As the lead worker swept his high-powered lantern across the gravel floor beneath a web of overhead steam pipes, the beam caught a flash of dark fabric resting near an inactive coal furnace. Lying face down on the freezing gravel, her hands bound behind her back with thick, military-grade black tactical cord, was Julie Ann Miller. The discovery sent shockwaves through the highest levels of city administration and the Chicago Police Department. Within 30 minutes of the utility workers' frantic 911 call, Fulton Street was cordoned off with miles of yellow crime scene tape. Dozens of police cruisers, forensic van units, mobile command centers, and high-ranking department officials descended upon the industrial block, their flashing red and blue strobe lights reflecting off the snow-covered brick facades. Detective Marcus Vance and Detective Arthur Pendleton were among the first investigators to step down into the subterranean vault. The scene that greeted them under the harsh portable halogen lights was a chilling demonstration of clinical, calculated brutality. Julie Ann was still wearing her dark wool winter coat, her boots, and her clothing, but her hands had been secured behind her lower back with professional, highly intricate knots utilizing 7mm braided nylon cord, a specific material commonly used in military rigging and heavy industrial cargo transport. Her mouth had been sealed with multiple wraps of 3-inch industrial duct tape, ensuring she could not scream or make sound within the subterranean chamber. The cause of death was immediately evident to the responding deputy medical examiner, a devastating, high-velocity blunt force trauma to the base of her skull, executed with a dense, heavy instrument that had fractured the occipital bone without breaking the outer skin of her wool coat hood. There were no defensive wounds on her arms, hands, or wrists, indicating that she had been completely immobilized or rendered unconscious before the fatal blow was delivered. What terrified the investigating team most was not just the violence of the murder, but the extraordinary clinical discipline exhibited by the killer at the secondary crime scene. The entire area surrounding the body had been systematically scoured with a mixture of industrial-grade chemical solvents, bleach, and mineral spirits. The chemical wash had been liberally poured over Julie Ann's outer clothing, her footwear, and the gravel floor around her body, creating a harsh, chemical fumes haze that stung the eyes of the forensic technicians as they attempted to process the scene. In 1988, forensic science relied heavily on physical evidence recovery, latent fingerprints developed with magnetic powder, bodily fluid identification through traditional ABO blood typing, and hair and fiber comparison under dual comparison microscopes. The killer who executed Julie Ann Miller seemed fully aware of these technical methodologies. By dousing the body and the surrounding floor with corrosive solvents, he had effectively dissolved any biological fluids, destroyed potential hair transfers, and erased any latent shoe impressions that might have been left in the damp gravel. The crime scene unit spent 48 continuous hours inside the Fulton Street boiler room, sifting through tons of gravel with fine wire mesh, scraping paint samples from the rusted steel door, and collecting every scrap of material within a 50-foot radius. They recovered several partial boot prints in the frozen mud outside the alleyway entrance, but the impressions were heavily degraded by melting snow and vehicle exhaust, yielding only the generic outline of a standard work boot manufactured by dozens of footwear companies across North America. The autopsies conducted at the Cook County Medical Examiner's office confirmed the initial field findings. Julie Ann had died within hours of her abduction on the night of December 14th. Toxicological screenings revealed no drugs or alcohol in her system. The medical examiner confirmed that the chemical wash applied to her body had successfully stripped away any external trace evidence, leaving investigators with no biological footprint, no weapon, and no clear physical link to the perpetrator. As the physical evidence was cataloged into evidence bags, the central, haunting question began to obsess the investigative task force. How did a killer enter a locked, high-security apartment building in the West Loop, abduct and alert, intelligent 24-year-old woman from her fourth-floor unit without causing a struggle or alerting neighbors, transport her through a secure lobby or service elevator without being seen by the doorman, drive her 3 miles across the city in a snowstorm, and execute her in a padlocked industrial boiler room without leaving a single fingerprint? The sheer logistical impossibility of the crime suggested an insider, someone who possessed complete, unrestricted physical access to both the residential building on Huron Street and the abandoned industrial facility on Fulton Street. It suggested a predator who did not need to break down doors because he carried keys, a man who understood the layout of city infrastructure, the blind spots of residential security systems, and the precise mechanical vulnerabilities of urban buildings. Detectives immediately turned their attention to the building staff at 412 West Huron Street. Doorman Harold Vance was subjected to hours of intense interrogation, his background thoroughly vetted by federal and local authorities. His financial records were audited, his personal vehicle was impounded and processed by crime scene technicians, and he was subjected to multiple polygraph examinations. The results were conclusive. The elderly doorman was completely cleared. He had no criminal record, his polygraph tests showed no physiological deception, and his physical health rendered it impossible for him to carry out the heavy physical demands of the crime. The task force then expanded its net, auditing every maintenance worker, utility contractor, janitorial worker, and delivery driver who had held access to the Huron Street building within the preceding 12 months. Over 200 individuals were interviewed, fingerprinted, and background checked. Dozens of potential suspects were placed under round-the-clock physical surveillance by undercover units. Yet, every single lead systematically unraveled under detailed scrutiny. Alibis were verified, physical whereabouts were confirmed by third-party witnesses, and background checks failed to reveal a single connection to the abandoned Fulton Street property. The investigation began to buckle under the sheer weight of its own frustrating complexity. The city of Chicago was gripped by an unprecedented wave of public anxiety. High-rise apartment complexes across the downtown district reported sudden surges in lease cancellations as young professionals fled the city center for the perceived safety of the suburbs. Locksmith companies worked 24-hour shifts installing heavy iron security bars, secondary deadbolts, and door chain alarms. Local newspapers published daily editorials criticizing the police department's inability to capture a killer who seemed to walk through solid walls and vanish into thin air. Despite the mounting public pressure, the task force exhausted every available investigative avenue known to 20th-century law enforcement. By the summer of 1989, 6 months after the murder, the flood of public tips had slowed to a trickle. The dedicated task force was gradually scaled back, its investigators reassigned to fresh homicide cases that continued to pile up across the city's police divisions. The physical evidence items, the wool coat, the leather purse, the industrial duct tape, and the military-grade tactical cord, were carefully wrapped in archival paper, sealed inside heavy cardboard containers, and transferred into the subterranean vault of the Chicago Police Department's Evidence Division. The case file was stamped with a stark, cold label that would remain unchanged for nearly 4 decades: Unsolved Homicide, Case 88-9012. For 38 long years, the file sat in the dark. Generations of detectives came and went through the doors of Area 4, each new cohort pulling the heavy manila folders from the shelf, reviewing the black and white crime scene photos, shaking their heads at the clinical perfection of the crime, and returning the file to its resting place. The killer remained a shadow, a phantom who had committed the perfect crime, stepping back into the quiet fabric of Midwestern society, confident that the cold winter of 1988 and a bucket of industrial bleach had bought him permanent, absolute freedom. The passage of time in an unsolved murder investigation is usually the killer's greatest ally. As years turn into decades, memory degrades, witnesses relocate or pass away, physical evidence deteriorates in storage, and the urgent public outrage that once demanded daily press conferences fades into the background noise of a busy metropolis. By the mid-1990s, the brutal murder of Julianne Miller had slipped from the front pages of Chicago newspapers into the realm of local urban legend, a cautionary tale whispered among young professionals moving into West Loop apartments, a grim ghost story told by veteran homicide detectives to rookie investigators at the police academy on West Harrison Street. Inside the Evidence Division of the Chicago Police Department, Case File 88 to 9012 occupied a modest 6 inches of shelf space in Vault Locker 81. Inside, the heavy cardboard containers sat the silent remnants of that December night in 1988. The dark wool coat stained with dry chemical residue, the leather purse, the rolls of heavy industrial duct tape, and the tightly knotted strands of 7mm black tactical cord that had bound Julianne's wrists behind her back. Every 5 years, during routine evidence audits, a technician would log the box, verify the tamper-evident seals, check the climate controls of the storage locker, and slide the container back onto its metal rack. To the untrained eye, it was a dead file, a silent tomb of cold ambition and unsolved violence. But embedded within those physical items was an invisible biological signature, a genetic message waiting for human knowledge to catch up to the horror that had taken place in the Fulton Street boiler room. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, the field of forensic serology underwent its first primitive revolution with the introduction of restriction fragment length polymorphism and early short tandem repeat DNA testing. However, these early scientific techniques required massive, pristine biological samples, visible bloodstains the size of a quarter or concentrated bodily fluids, to extract a viable genetic profile. The killer who executed Julianne Miller had understood this limitation perfectly. By dousing her clothing and the crime scene in industrial bleach and mineral spirits, he had successfully denatured the surface proteins and destroyed any traditional biological evidence that could have been analyzed by 20th-century state crime laboratories. What the killer did not understand, what no human being in 1988 could have possibly anticipated, was the unimaginable revolution that would sweep through molecular biology at the turn of the 21st century. Scientists discovered that human beings do not merely leave biological signatures through visible fluids. We shed skin cells continuously, leaving microscopic traces of cellular tissue, touch DNA, on every object we handle, every rope we tie, and every surface we press against with physical force. More importantly, geneticists learned that when skin cells are squeezed tightly beneath the compressed inner fibers of a dense material, such as a tightly pulled knot in a nylon tactical cord, those microscopic cells can remain protected from external chemical washes, shielded from environmental degradation, and preserved in a near-pristine state for decades. In the autumn of 2025, a newly formed federal cold case task force, operating in partnership with the Illinois State Police Forensic Science Command and private genetic laboratories, launched Operation Second Sight, a dedicated initiative aimed at applying state-of-the-art touch DNA extraction and advanced forensic genetic genealogy to 50 of northern Illinois' most notorious unsolved cold cases. Case File 88 to 9012 was selected as a top priority candidate. The task of re-examining the physical evidence was assigned to Dr. Eris Thorne, a world-renowned forensic geneticist at the Center for Advanced Forensic Genomics in downtown Chicago. On a cold October morning in 2025, precisely 37 years after Julianne Miller vanished from her Huron Street apartment, Dr. Thorne carefully broke the yellowed tamper-evident tape on the 1988 evidence containers under sterile, negative-pressure laboratory conditions. Dr. Thorne and his team did not focus on the areas doused in chemical solvents. Instead, they focused their efforts on the physical mechanics of the physical restraint itself, the black military-grade tactical cord. To bind a human being's wrists behind their back with sufficient force to immobilize them, a perpetrator must exert significant mechanical leverage, gripping the cord tightly, pulling the nylon strands across their palms, and driving their fingers deep into the core of the knots to secure the binding. During this high-friction physical interaction, thousands of microscopic epidermal skin cells are forcefully scraped from the friction ridges of the killer's fingers, embedding deep within the inner weave of the nylon fibers. Utilizing a revolutionary forensic technique known as vacuum-assisted wet swabbing combined with low-frequency ultrasonic elution, Dr. Thorne's team systematically untied the 37-year-old knots in the tactical cord millimeter by millimeter. As each inner loop was exposed to the sterile laboratory air for the first time since December 1988, scientists applied high-intensity laser-induced fluorescence to locate microscopic clusters of cellular debris trapped inside the central core of the knots, areas that had been completely shielded from the bleach wash applied by the killer 37 years prior. The laboratory extraction yielded an astonishing result: 7 nanograms of viable, protected male cellular tissue. While 7 nanograms is a microscopic quantity, far smaller than a single grain of salt and entirely invisible to the naked eye, it represented a gold mine for 21st-century genomic sequencing. Utilizing single nucleotide polymorphism, SNP, microarray technology, the laboratory amplified the minute DNA sample, reading hundreds of thousands of genetic markers across the entire human genome to construct a complete, high-resolution 3D digital DNA profile of the perpetrator. The immediate next step was an automated search against CODIS, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's combined DNA index system, which contains millions of DNA profiles collected from convicted felons, arrestees, and unsolved crime scenes across all 50 states. The task force waited with bated breath as the digital profile was compared against national law enforcement databases. 12 hours later, the system returned a stark, disappointing result: no match found. The lack of a CODIS had explained why the killer had evaded law enforcement for nearly 4 decades. He was not a career criminal with a long rap sheet. He had never been convicted of a felony. His fingerprints had never been entered into state automated fingerprint systems, and he had never been processed for a violent offense that would have required a mandatory state DNA collection. He was a ghost in the system, a man who had committed a single, devastatingly precise murder and then slipped back into the quiet, law-abiding routines of everyday society. However, where traditional law enforcement databases failed, the groundbreaking science of investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, opened a door that had been locked for 38 years. Under strict legal protocols and judicial oversight, the task force uploaded the digital SNP profile of the unknown killer into public, opt-in genetic genealogy databases such as GeneMatch and Family Tree DNA, platforms where millions of private citizens voluntarily submit their genetic data to explore their ancestral family trees. Genetic genealogists do not look for a direct one-to-one match to the suspect. Instead, they analyze shared segments of centimorgans of DNA to identify biological relatives, first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, who share common ancestors with the unknown perpetrator. In November 2025, the genetic genealogy algorithm flagged a vital clue: 2 distant second cousins living in northern Illinois who shared significant, overlapping segments of DNA with the unknown Fulton Street killer. Lead forensic genealogist Dr. Helen Thornbrooks was brought in to lead the ancestral reconstruction. Working around the clock alongside homicide detectives, Dr. Thornbrooks built a massive, multi-generational reverse family tree, tracing bloodlines back to a common great-grandparent who had lived in Rockford, Illinois, in the early 20th century. Over 3 months of meticulous archival research, sifting through census records, marriage certificates, military draft cards, high school yearbooks, property deeds, and obituary notices, the genealogical team systematically mapped out every male descendant of that ancestral line across 4 generations. The family tree contained over 200 male relatives spanning 3 states. One by one, detectives systematically eliminated potential relatives based on physical age, verified geographical locations during December 1988, military deployment records, and verified death certificates. By January 2026, the massive ancestral tree had been pruned down to a single branch, a single family line, and ultimately, a single living individual who matched every single physical, temporal, and geographical requirement of the 1988 crime timeline. The name that emerged at the top of the cold case dossier was Arthur Pendleton. To the detectives on the task force, the name Arthur Pendleton triggered an immediate, chilling sensation of disbelief. In 1988, Arthur Pendleton had been a 33-year-old municipal employee, a senior inspector for the City of Chicago's Department of Buildings, specializing in commercial structural inspections, elevator mechanics, and utility access codes throughout the West Loop and downtown business districts. More horrifyingly, historical police records revealed that in December 1988, Pendleton had been temporarily assigned as a liaison to the Area 4 Homicide Division, assisting investigating officers by providing municipal blueprints, utility access keys, and building code records for industrial properties throughout the Fulton Market corridor. The monster who had executed Julianne Miller had not been watching the police investigation from afar with anxious eyes. He had been standing inside the command center. He had walked the hallways of the precinct. He had listened to detectives discuss their strategies. He had provided technical advice regarding building access points, and he had sat at the same coffee tables as the investigators who were hunting him, using his insider knowledge of municipal infrastructure and police procedures to ensure his crime remained unsolvable. In 2026, Arthur Pendleton was a 71-year-old retired civil engineer living in an opulent, 4,000-square-foot home in a quiet, manicured suburban subdivision in Naperville, Illinois. He was a respected figure in his local community, a man who served as the treasurer of his local homeowners association, organized annual neighborhood charity drives, attended Sunday church services regularly, and spent his afternoons teaching his young grandchildren how to tend to rose bushes in his backyard garden. To his family, friends, and neighbors, Pendleton was the epitome of suburban respectability, a quiet, soft-spoken, grandfatherly gentleman who spent his golden years reading history novels, attending municipal council meetings, and living a blameless, serene existence. The task force knew that a genealogical match was legally sufficient to establish probable cause for targeted surveillance, but to secure an ironclad capital murder arrest warrant that would withstand intense judicial scrutiny in a court of law, they required a direct, one-to-one physical DNA confirmation comparing the 2025 lab extraction to Pendleton's personal biological material. On February 3, 2026, a discreet, undercover surveillance team from the Chicago Police Department and the FBI Violent Crimes Task Force established a 24-hour mobile watch on Pendleton's Naperville home. For 4 agonizing days, detectives watched through high-powered telephoto lenses as the 71-year-old suspect went about his mundane suburban routine, driving his pristine silver sedan to the local grocery store, picking up dry cleaning, conversing cheerfully with neighbors over the mailbox, and sipping coffee on his back patio. The breakthrough occurred on the morning of February 8, 2026. Undercover officers shadowed Pendleton as he drove to a local suburban bakery and coffee shop on Washington Street. Pendleton walked inside, ordered a hot coffee in a disposable paper cup, sat by the window reading a local newspaper for 20 minutes, and then discarded the empty paper cup into a recycling receptacle outside the entrance before walking back to his vehicle. Within 10 seconds of Pendleton's car pulling out of the parking lot, an undercover detective casually stepped up to the receptacle, retrieved the discarded paper cup using sterile forceps, sealed it inside a biohazard collection container, and dispatched it via high-priority police escort to the Illinois State Police Forensic Science Center in Chicago. At 6 o'clock on the evening of February 9, 2026, the lab completed the comparative STR analysis, matching the touch DNA extracted from the lip of the discarded coffee cup to the touch DNA recovered from the inner knots of the 1988 tactical cord. Dr. Eris Thorne signed the final analytical report. The scientific conclusion was absolute, mathematical, and unassailable. The biological material recovered from the crime scene where Julianne Miller was bound and murdered belonged exclusively to Arthur Pendleton. The random match probability was calculated at 1 in 11.8 billion, a figure exceeding the entire human population of the planet Earth. At 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday, February 10th, 2026, while the city of Chicago was blanketed in a soft, quiet winter snowfall reminiscent of December 1988, a heavily armed SWAT tactical team alongside senior homicide detectives executed a high-priority arrest warrant at Pendleton's Naperville residence. The arrest was swift, silent, and overwhelming. Tactical officers breached the front perimeter, securing the 71-year-old as he walked down his hallway in a bathrobe to make morning tea. Pendleton offered no physical resistance. As the cold steel of modern police handcuffs clicked over his frail, liver-spotted wrists, his face drained of all color, his lips trembling slightly as he looked into the eyes of Detective Marcus Vance, the son of the original 1988 lead investigator, who had taken over the cold case task force to fulfill his late father's legacy. As news of the arrest flashed across local news stations and national broadcast networks, the city of Chicago experienced a shockwave of historical proportion. The banner headline that dominated television screens, news websites, and front-page newspapers read, "Chicago 1988 Cold Case Closed. Unexpected DNA Match Reveals Perpetrator." In a press conference held at Chicago Police Headquarters on Michigan Avenue, the Cook County State's attorney and the chief of detectives laid out the horrifying mechanics of how the 38-year-old crime had been executed. In late 1988, during a routine municipal structural audit of high-rise residential properties in the West Loop, Inspector Arthur Pendleton had uncovered a series of severe building code violations and illegal financial kickbacks associated with building management contracts at 412 West Huron Street. Julianne Miller, in her capacity as a senior commercial real estate auditor for LaSalle National Bank, had independently discovered the same accounting discrepancies and was scheduled to submit her official report to federal regulators on December 15, 1988, a disclosure that would have resulted in Pendleton's immediate criminal indictment, the destruction of his career, and a long prison sentence. Utilizing his official municipal master keys and his complete knowledge of the Huron Street building's utility corridors, Pendleton had entered Julianne's apartment complex through an unmonitored basement utility shaft, bypassing the doorman in the lobby. He used a municipal passkey to enter apartment 4B while Julianne was in the kitchen, ambushed her from behind, and forced her down the service elevator using a master key override. He then transported her in his official city inspector vehicle to the abandoned Fulton Street warehouse, a property he knew was completely off the grid and scheduled for municipal demolition, where he bound her wrists, executed her in the cold subterranean boiler room, and scoured the scene with industrial solvents he had taken from the city maintenance depot. For 38 years, Arthur Pendleton had lived among the citizens of Illinois as a free man, convinced that his technical expertise, his chemical cleanup, and his position of authority had granted him permanent immunity from justice. He had watched his children grow, enjoyed his retirement, and celebrated holidays while Julianne Miller lay in a cold grave and her family endured 38 years of agonizing, unresolved nightmare. Today, as Arthur Pendleton sits inside a concrete holding cell at the Cook County Jail awaiting his formal capital murder trial, the long, dark shadow that hung over the city of Chicago since the winter of 1988 has finally been lifted. The cold case is no longer an unsolved mystery. The ghost of Elmwood Avenue and Fulton Street has been stripped of his disguise, and the microscopic evidence left behind in the dark 38 years ago has proven to the world that time does not erase guilt, science does not forget, and no matter how deep you bury a lie, justice will always find its way back into the light. The iron doors of the Cook County Jail holding block click shut with a heavy, mechanical resonance, sealing Arthur Pendleton into a world stripped of suburban comfort, manicured lawns, and 38 years of carefully curated respectability. The transformation from a revered 71-year-old retired civil engineer to inmate 2026 to 8809 was immediate, absolute, and merciless. Stripped of his wool sweater and leather shoes, dressed in a coarse orange institutional jumpsuit, his wrists bruised by the tight grip of steel handcuffs, Pendleton sat on the edge of a stainless steel bunk inside an 8-by-10-foot concrete cell, staring at the painted cinderblock wall. Outside the high-perimeter walls of the jail, the city of Chicago was engulfed in a media storm of historical proportions. The revelation that the West Loop Phantom, the monster who had paralyzed the downtown district in the freezing winter of 1988, was not a transient drifter or a roaming serial killer, but a former municipal building inspector living peacefully in Naperville, sent shockwaves through every corner of Illinois. Evening news broadcasts led with high-definition aerial footage of Pendleton's suburban home being combed by federal evidence response teams, while front-page newspaper headlines across the nation proclaimed, "Inside the Mind of the West Loop Phantom, How an Auditor's Discovery Triggered a 38-Year Cover-Up." At Chicago Police Headquarters on Michigan Avenue, the Cold Case Task Force, led by Detective Marcus Vance and State's Attorney Ellen Rodriguez, was methodically assembling the final pieces of the narrative that would be presented to a Cook County grand jury. While the touch DNA match from the inner knots of the tactical cord provided an unassailable biological link, the prosecution was determined to construct an airtight, multi-layered case that demonstrated premeditation, financial motive, and the exact physical mechanics of how the abduction was executed without alerting a single resident at 412 West Huron Street. To build the timeline, investigators turned to newly digitized municipal records, archived city payroll logs, and restored corporate backup tapes from LaSalle National Bank that had sat untouched in state archives for nearly 4 decades. What emerged from the forensic reconstruction was a chilling portrait of systemic municipal corruption and calculated, predatory violence. In the autumn of 1988, Arthur Pendleton served as a senior structural inspector for the City of Chicago's Department of Buildings. Armed with official city badges, master keys, and unrestricted access to commercial and residential structures across the West Loop, Pendleton operated a lucrative, off-the-books bribery ring. In exchange for thousands of dollars in cash kickbacks from corrupt real estate developers and building management firms, Pendleton routinely signed off on severe structural building code violations, falsified fire safety certifications, and overlooked illegal plumbing and electrical installations across dozens of downtown properties. His fatal mistake occurred when he targeted 412 West Huron Street, the high-rise residential complex where Julianne Miller resided. In October 1988, LaSalle National Bank was evaluating a multi-million-dollar commercial loan application to refinance the property. Julianne Miller, in her capacity as a brilliant, unyielding corporate auditor for the bank, was assigned to conduct a complete financial and regulatory audit of the building's physical assets and municipal compliance records. Julianne was meticulous, tireless, and utterly immune to corporate pressure. During her preliminary audit in late November 1988, she discovered a series of massive financial discrepancies, thousands of dollars in fraudulent maintenance fees paid to a dummy corporation registered under an alias in Cook County. More critically, she cross-referenced municipal inspection logs and discovered that Arthur Pendleton had personally issued clean building code safety certificates for the property despite the presence of catastrophic structural defects in the building's heating and elevator systems, defects that would cost millions to remediate. On December 10, 1988, 4 days before her disappearance, Julianne typed a confidential preliminary audit memorandum to her senior partners at LaSalle National Bank, explicitly naming the fraudulent billing schemes and noting that she intended to submit a formal evidentiary file to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois on Friday, December 15th. A copy of that preliminary memorandum was recovered during the 2026 search of Pendleton's suburban home, tucked inside a hidden floor safe beneath his workshop desk, alongside vintage 1988 municipal access maps of the West Loop sewer and utility tunnels. Pendleton had realized that Julianne's report would not merely cost him his city job. It would lead directly to a federal grand jury indictment, the forfeiture of his pension, and decades in a federal penitentiary for extortion, wire fraud, and official corruption. His career, his reputation, his family's social standing, and his clean suburban life were on the verge of total annihilation. Faced with impending ruin, the 33-year-old civil engineer applied his technical knowledge of city infrastructure to plan what he believed would be the perfect, unsolvable execution. On the evening of December 14, 1988, Pendleton drove his official municipal inspection vehicle to the West Loop, parking in a dark service alley 2 blocks away from 412 West Huron Street. Utilizing his municipal master passkeys and his complete familiarity with the building's utility design, he bypassed the front lobby completely. He entered through an unmonitored basement utility door connected to the city's steam tunnels, rode the manual freight elevator, a service lift that did not pass through the main lobby, and ascended directly to the 4th floor. He waited in the dimly lit service stairwell until he heard the door of apartment 4B close. At precisely 8:20 p.m., moments after Julianne concluded her final phone call to her mother, Pendleton knocked on her door. Julianne recognized him. He was not a stranger, nor was he a masked intruder breaking through a window. He was the city building inspector who had been present during her physical audit of the building 2 weeks earlier. Dressed in his official municipal jacket, carrying an official clipboard and a ring of city keys, Pendleton claimed there was an urgent high-pressure gas leak in the utility shaft behind her kitchen wall that required immediate inspection. Without a second thought, trusting the authority of a municipal badge and the familiar face of a city employee, Julian stepped back and opened her door. The moment the deadbolt clicked open, the trap snapped shut. Pendleton stepped into the foyer, immediately striking Julianne from behind with a dense, heavy rubber mallet used in structural testing. The strike rendered her instantly unconscious, preventing any struggle, scream, or commotion. He bound her wrists behind her back with pre-cut lengths of 7mm military-grade black tactical cord, sealed her mouth with heavy industrial duct tape, and wrapped her in her own wool winter coat to prevent any biological transfers onto his clothing. Working with clinical, rapid precision, Pendleton carried her limp body into the freight elevator, lowered her to the basement utility level, and loaded her into the rear cargo bed of his municipal truck. He drove 3 miles through the gathering winter snowstorm to the abandoned Fulton Street meatpacking warehouse, a city-owned industrial property that he knew was scheduled for municipal demolition and was entirely off the grid. Inside the freezing subterranean boiler room, beneath a web of inactive steam pipes, Pendleton delivered the fatal blow to the base of her skull. He then executed a meticulous, multi-hour forensic cleanup. Drawing on his knowledge of police forensic methodologies, he poured gallons of industrial-grade chemical solvents, mineral spirits, and bleach over the body, her clothing, and the surrounding gravel floor to dissolve any hair, fibers, or bodily fluids he might have left behind. He relocked the outer alleyway door with a rusted padlock, positioning it to appear securely fastened from the street, entered his truck, and drove home to his family in time for breakfast. The following morning, on December 15, 1988, as police sirens echoed across the West Loop, Inspector Arthur Pendleton reported to work at the Department of Buildings as he did every day. When the Homicide Task Force requested municipal assistance to inspect properties along Fulton Market, Pendleton volunteered for the assignment. For weeks, he walked beside homicide detectives, offering technical advice, pointing out utility access points, and monitoring the progress of the investigation from the inside, confident that his chemical wash had erased every trace of his existence from the Fulton Street vault. For 38 years, that confidence sustained him. He watched the city change around him, saw the industrial warehouses of Fulton Market transformed into multi-million-dollar luxury condominiums, watched his children graduate from university, and enjoyed 3 decades of comfortable, praised retirement. He convinced himself that the night of December 14, 1988, was a closed chapter, a necessary piece of professional maintenance that had successfully preserved his freedom. He had not factored in the microscopic memory of nylon cord, nor the unyielding patience of modern science. Inside the interrogation suite at Chicago Police Headquarters, hours after his arrest, Arthur Pendleton sat across from Detective Marcus Vance and State's Attorney Ellen Rodriguez. The confidence that had sustained him for nearly 4 decades was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, trembling panic of a man whose illusion of invulnerability had collapsed in an instant. On the table between them lay a thick blue binder containing high-definition single-nucleotide polymorphism mapping charts, the 1988 preliminary audit memorandum recovered from his floor safe, and the comparative STR DNA report linking the coffee cup to the inner knots of the tactical cord. 38 years, Arthur, Detective Vance said, his voice quiet, steady, and filled with unshakable authority. You thought you scoured that boiler room clean. You thought the bleach washed away your sins. But you pulled those knots tight with your own hands. You pressed your fingers deep into the nylon weave while Julie and lay on that concrete floor. You left your cellular signature trapped inside those knots, waiting for us. Pendleton stared at the genetic mapping charts, his liver-spotted hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the metal table. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The suburban camouflage, the rose bushes, the homeowners association meetings, the charity drives was gone. Sitting in the cold fluorescent light of the interrogation room was the calculating predator of 1988, trapped by his own physical handiwork. She was 24 years old, Arthur, Ellen Rodriguez said, leaning forward. She had a family who loved her, a career ahead of her, and a life she built with honesty and hard work. You took all of it to protect a bribery scheme. You spent 38 years living a lie while her family lived in living hell. The lie is over. Science found you. On March 14, 2026, the grand jury of Cook County returned a multi-count indictment against Arthur Pendleton, first-degree premeditated murder, aggravated kidnapping, and official misconduct. The state's attorney's office announced it would seek the maximum penalty allowed under Illinois law, ensuring that the former municipal inspector would never step foot outside a state penal facility for the remainder of his natural life. As the legal proceedings march forward toward a historic trial, the town of Naperville and the city of Chicago remain gripped by the haunting resolution of a case that defined an era. The cold case file that sat in Vault Locker 81 for 38 years is no longer a monument to unsolved horror. It is an unassailable testament to the power of human persistence, scientific progress, and the eternal truth that time does not erase guilt. No lie remains hidden forever, and justice, no matter how long delayed, always claims the final word. The preliminary hearing at the George North Layton Criminal Court building in downtown Chicago drew a crowd that spilled out of room 702, filled the high-ceilinged marble hallways, and packed the plaza along South California Avenue with news crews, legal analysts, and curious onlookers. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with a unique, historic tension. For 38 years, this case had been defined by absence, an absent victim, an absent suspect, and an absent resolution. But on the morning of April 22, 2026, the absence was replaced by the cold, physical presence of Arthur Pendleton, sitting quietly at the defense table between two top-tier criminal defense attorneys. Wearing a dark charcoal suit that seemed 2 sizes too large for his shrunken frame, the 71-year-old former municipal inspector looked fragile, almost meek, to the casual observer. He wore thin, wire-rimmed glasses, kept his liver-spotted hands folded neatly over a yellow legal pad, and stared straight ahead, studiously avoiding the gallery where surviving members of the Miller family sat in frozen, dignified silence. Beside Arthur Miller sat his daughter, Clara, the niece named after the young woman whose life was stolen in 1988. The prosecution, led by Senior Assistant State's Attorney Ellen Rodriguez, did not open with theatrical speeches or emotional appeals. Instead, Rodriguez laid out a cold, methodical blueprint of scientific certainty. Standing before presiding Judge Thomas Harrington, she called Dr. Eris Thorne to the witness stand. The renowned geneticist brought with him a high-definition digital display that projected 3-dimensional, color-coded models of single nucleotide polymorphism mapping directly onto the courtroom screens. For 4 continuous hours, Dr. Thorne walked the court through the physics of touch DNA and microscopic cellular extraction. He explained how the 7 nanograms of male cellular material, recovered from the inner, unexposed core of the 7mm tactical cord, had been preserved for nearly 4 decades. He detailed how the tight, high-friction knots pulled by the killer in 1988 had created a sealed, anaerobic microenvironment, trapping skin cells beneath compressed nylon fibers and protecting them from the chemical wash applied to the exterior of the crime scene. Your Honor, Dr. Thorne testified, his voice resonant and precise. Chemical solvents like household bleach and mineral spirits are highly effective at destroying surface proteins and breaking down exposed biological material on non-porous or loosely woven surfaces. But when a knot is pulled under extreme physical force, the structural density at the center of that knot reaches several hundred pounds per square inch. The chemical wash never penetrated the central core of the binding. What we recovered was not a surface contamination. It was an encapsulated cellular snapshot of the individual who physically constructed those knots on December 14, 1988. Dr. Thorne then presented the mathematical calculations resulting from the STR comparative profile. The courtroom was dead silent as the numbers appeared on the screen, a random match probability of 1 in 11.8 billion. To put this in perspective, Dr. Thorne added, looking directly at the bench, there are currently 8 billion human beings on planet Earth. To find another unrelated male whose DNA profile matches the sample recovered from the inner core of that tactical cord, you would have to search a population nearly 1.5 times the size of the entire living world. The defense team, led by veteran Chicago trial lawyer Jonathan Vance, no relation to the original lead detective, launched an aggressive, highly technical counterattack aimed at undermining the integrity of the chain of custody. Jonathan Vance cross-examined Dr. Thorne for nearly 3 hours, focusing intensely on the storage conditions inside Vault Locker 81 over the 38-year period. Dr. Thorne, Jonathan Vance began, pacing deliberately in front of the witness stand. In 38 years, Evidence Box 88 to 9012 was opened, logged, transferred, and audited no less than 14 times by various property clerks, lab technicians, and cold case investigators. Isn't it true that in 1988, evidence handlers did not wear the modern, full-body Tyvek suits, double nitrile gloves, or sterile air respirators that your laboratory utilizes today? That is correct, Dr. Thorne conceded. Standard evidence collection protocols in 1988 involved latex gloves, but not full-body personal protective equipment. And isn't it also true, Vance pressed, his voice rising, that touch DNA is exceptionally prone to secondary and tertiary transfer? That a single sneeze, an unmasked breath, or a touch surface by an investigator in 1988 or 1995 could transfer microscopic skin cells onto an evidence item without their knowledge. That is a recognized theoretical dynamic in surface touch DNA analysis, Dr. Thorne replied calmly. However, secondary transfer cannot account for the physical distribution of the cellular material recovered in this case. The biological profile of Arthur Pendleton was not found on the outer surface of the wool coat or the handle of the purse. It was found exclusively inside the locked inner core of the knot, a space that was structurally inaccessible after the knot was tied on the night of the murder. For secondary transfer to occur inside that knot, Mr. Pendleton's skin cells would have had to be deposited on the cord before or during the precise physical moment the knot was being tied under high tension. The scientific defense was severely damaged, but Jonathan Vance shifted his focus to the municipal corruption files recovered from Pendleton's home, attempting to argue that the 1988 preliminary audit memorandum found in his safe was merely an old work file kept by a compulsive municipal employee who archived all his official paperwork. That line of argument was abruptly dismantled when the prosecution called its second surprise witness, 78-year-old Harold Vance, the retired doorman who had worked the front desk of 412 West Huron Street on the night Julie Ann Miller vanished. Walking slowly to the stand with the aid of a cane, the elderly doorman took the oath. His hair was thin and white, but his eyes were sharp, and his memory of that December night remained vivid. State's Attorney Rodriguez approached the witness stand, holding a black and white photograph taken in December 1988 showing Arthur Pendleton wearing his official City of Chicago Department of Buildings winter jacket, complete with the municipal emblem on the left shoulder and a heavy brass ring of city master keys clipped to his belt. Mr. Vance, Rodriguez asked, in December of 1988, did you recognize the defendant, Arthur Pendleton? Yes, ma'am, I did, the old doorman answered softly. He was the senior building inspector assigned to our block. He came through our lobby at least twice a month. He had master key clearances for the basement utility rooms, the elevator shafts, and the service corridors. We all knew him. He walked through that building like he owned it. Cast your mind back to the evening of December 14th, 1988, Rodriguez continued. Did you see Mr. Pendleton in the lobby between 6 o'clock and midnight?
No, Harold Vance replied firmly.
Not in the main lobby. Did Mr. Pendleton have the physical capability to enter that building without passing your front desk? Objection. Speculation. Jonathan Vance shouted from the defense table. Overruled. Judge Harrington declared. The witness may answer based on his personal knowledge of the building's physical layout. He didn't just have the capability, ma'am, he had the keys, Harold Vance testified, his voice trembling with quiet emotion. The service entrance in the alley led straight down to the steam tunnel and the manual freight elevator. The freight elevator didn't register on the lobby panel. If you had the municipal passkey, which Inspector Pendleton did, you could take that lift from the basement straight up to the 4th floor service hallway without ever setting foot in my lobby, without ringing a doorbell, and without anyone knowing you were in the building. The courtroom fell into an intense, heavy quiet as the full logistical reality of the abduction crystallized. The defense table was silent. Arthur Pendleton sat motionless, his gaze fixed firmly on his folded hands, his knuckle joints turning white as he gripped his pen. The prosecution then delivered its final, crushing blow for the preliminary hearing, the introduction of financial ledger analysis conducted by the FBI's Forensic Accounting Unit. The lead financial analyst testified that between January 1987 and November 1988, Arthur Pendleton had deposited over $64,000 in untraceable cash into 3 separate offshore bank accounts registered under a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. The monthly cash deposits stopped permanently in January 1989, less than 3 weeks after Julianne Miller was murdered and her audit report was destroyed. The financial records established a clear, unassailable chain of criminal motive. Pendleton was operating an extensive, highly lucrative extortion ring that netted him tens of thousands of dollars in illicit cash. Julianne Miller's relentless audit had threatened to expose that scheme to federal prosecutors. Her execution was not a random act of passion. It was an official corporate liquidation executed by a municipal insider who used his authority, his master keys, and his technical expertise to protect his wealth and freedom. At the conclusion of the 3-day preliminary hearing, Judge Harrington did not hesitate. Striking his gavel against the wooden block, his voice echoed through room 702 with absolute finality. The court finds that the state has established overwhelming probable cause to believe that the defendant, Arthur Pendleton, committed the offenses of first-degree premeditated murder, aggravated kidnapping, and official misconduct, Judge Harrington ruled. Given the extraordinary nature of the evidence, the gravity of the charges, and the defendant's access to substantial offshore financial resources, the defendant represents a significant flight risk and a continuing threat to the administration of justice. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain remanded to the custody of the Cook County Sheriff without bond pending trial. As court officers stepped forward to attach leg irons and heavy waist chains to Pendleton, the gallery erupted into a collective, audible intake of breath. For 38 years, the ghost of the West Loop had walked free, secure in the belief that his crime was perfect. Now, wrapped in iron chains, shuffling slowly out of the courtroom under heavy armed guard, Arthur Pendleton was finally facing the unyielding wall of judicial accountability. Outside the courthouse, standing on the frost-dusted concrete plaza under a crisp spring sky, Arthur Miller stood surrounded by microphone stands and dozens of journalists. Tears glistened in his eyes, but his voice was steady, anchored by 4 decades of patience. For 38 years, Arthur Miller told the gathered press, "My family lived in a world where a phantom could walk into a locked apartment, steal a young woman's life, and vanish into thin air. We were told it was the perfect crime. But today proved that there is no such thing as a perfect crime when science and truth refuse to give up. My sister Julianne didn't just leave behind a cold case file. She left behind the very evidence that caught her killer. The man who thought he erased her is finally standing in the light, and he will answer for what he did." As the television satellite vans packed up their gear and the news broadcasts beamed the day's dramatic courtroom developments to millions of homes across America, the narrative surrounding the Chicago 1988 cold case reached its point of no return. The myth of the untraceable killer was broken. The legal machinery was set in motion, heading inexorably toward a full criminal trial that would expose every hidden detail of the Fulton Street boiler room, dismantle 38 years of suburban deception, and deliver the ultimate, unshakable verdict that justice had been waiting to proclaim since that cold December night in 1988. The heat wave that struck Chicago in July of 2026 transformed the gray asphalt of California Avenue into a shimmering, reflective plain, but inside courtroom 702 of the George North Layton Criminal Court building, the air remained unnaturally cold. The formal criminal trial of people of the state of Illinois versus Arthur Pendleton had officially commenced. Jury selection had dragged on for 2 excruciating weeks, as hundreds of prospective jurors were screened, questioned, and dismissed due to the overwhelming, inescapable media coverage that had saturated the Midwest since February. The 12 citizens who finally took their seats in the jury box, 8 women and 4 men, found themselves staring directly across the hardwood well at a 71-year-old grandfather whose quiet, frail exterior belied one of the most calculating, systematic murder plots in the history of Illinois jurisprudence. Senior Assistant State's Attorney Ellen Rodriguez stood before the jury box for her opening statement. She held no notes, no binder, and no pointer. In her hands, she carried a single, framed 8x10 photograph of Julian Miller taken in the spring of 1988, a young woman with sharp, intelligent brown eyes, smiling brightly outside the LaSalle National Bank building. Members of the jury, Rodriguez began, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls with resonant, unshakable clarity. On December 14, 1988, a 38-year lie was born in the freezing darkness of a Fulton Market boiler room. For nearly 4 decades, the defendant, Arthur Pendleton, lived a life of tranquil suburban privilege. He tended his rose garden in Naperville, he attended neighborhood block parties, he bounced grandchildren on his knee, and he fell asleep every night confident in the belief that he had committed the perfect crime. He believed that because he wore a municipal inspector's badge, carried city master keys, and possessed expert knowledge of urban infrastructure, he was smarter than the law, smarter than the police, and smarter than time itself. Rodriguez paused, placing the framed photograph gently onto the railing of the jury box, directly in front of the foreperson. What Arthur Pendleton did not understand, Rodriguez continued, turning her gaze directly toward the defense table, is that when he pulled those military-grade tactical cords around Julianne's wrists, when he used his palms and fingers to drive those knots deep into the nylon fibers to seal her fate, he left a microscopic piece of himself behind. He thought he washed it all away with gallons of industrial bleach and mineral spirits. But science does not forget. Truth does not dissolve in solvent. Trapped deep inside the core of those knots, sheltered from the elements for 38 winters, were 7 nanograms of the defendant's skin cells, a genetic receipt signed in his own cellular ink. When lead defense attorney Jonathan Vance rose for his opening statement, he adopted a starkly different, highly calculated strategy. He did not attempt to portray Pendleton as an innocent victim of mistaken identity, nor did he offer an absurd alternative alibi. Instead, Vance focused entirely on creating reasonable doubt through the lens of scientific fallibility and institutional contamination. The prosecution wants you to believe that science is infallible, that computers do not lie, and that a single microscopic sample smaller than a grain of dust can wipe away 71 years of a blameless human life, Vance told the jury, pacing slowly before the bench. What the prosecution will not emphasize to you is that in 1988, the Chicago Police Department's evidence storage procedures were far from modern standards. Over 38 years, Evidence Box 88 to 9012 was moved through 3 different facilities, opened by dozens of unmasked technicians, and handled in environments where ambient biological dust is constantly settling. We will demonstrate to you that what the state calls an unassailable genetic match is, in reality, the tragic result of secondary transfer, a phantom particle carried on an investigator's sleeve, deposited on a cord decades after the fact, and amplified by hypersensitive modern machinery that turns white noise into false certainty. With the parameters of the legal battle established, the state began presenting its evidentiary case, calling a sequence of witness testimony designed to systematically reconstruct the murder from every angle: logistics, motive, and molecular biology. The first major phase of the trial focused on the physical mechanics of the abduction. The state called Chief Engineer Thomas Bradley, a 30-year veteran of the Chicago Department of Buildings, who brought original 1988 architectural schematics of 412 West Huron Street to the witness stand. Projecting the blueprints onto large digital monitors, Bradley demonstrated how Pendleton utilized his municipal authority to navigate the building completely undetected. In 1988, Bradley testified, pointing to a blue-shaded corridor on the schematic. The municipal utility line ran directly from the city's underground steam tunnel network straight into the sub-basement of the Huron Street property. As a senior municipal inspector, Mr. Pendleton held in master a one-skeleton key that opened all municipal utility access doors in the West Loop. Furthermore, he possessed the physical override key for the building's manual freight elevator. Chief Bradley, Rodriguez asked, if a person utilized those specific keys on the night of December 14, 1988, could they enter the building from the rear alley, ascend to the 4th floor, and exit to the basement without ever passing through the residential lobby or alerting the front desk doorman? Yes, Bradley answered unequivocally. It is the only route in the entire building that completely bypassed the lobby desk, the security camera feeds, and the primary residential stairwells. To anyone without a municipal passkey, that route was completely impassable. To Arthur Pendleton, it was an open highway. The trial reached a critical turning point on its 4th day, when the prosecution pivoted from physical logistics to the financial motive that drove the execution. State's Attorney Rodriguez called Special Agent Karen Miller of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit to the stand. Special Agent Miller had spent 5 months meticulously analyzing 40-year-old banking ledgers, municipal contract approvals, and corporate audit logs. Agent Miller, Rodriguez directed, explained to the jury what Julianne Miller uncovered during her audit in late November 1988. Julianne Miller was auditing a $3 million commercial loan application submitted by a real estate development firm seeking to acquire and renovate properties along Huron Street. Agent Miller testified, adjusting a stack of financial binders. During her review, she discovered a recurring monthly payment of $4,500 originating from the developer's slush fund, routed through a shell company registered in Cook County named Midwest Structural Consulting. When we cross-referenced the corporate registration records of Midwest Structural Consulting, we discovered the sole signatory and sole beneficiary on the account was Arthur Pendleton. A whisper swept through the gallery. In the jury box, several jurors leaned forward, taking rapid notes. And what did Mr. Pendleton provide in exchange for these cash payments? Rodriguez asked. Official municipal protection, Agent Miller stated plainly. He signed off on fraudulent building code certifications, overlooked massive structural hazards in commercial properties, and allowed uninspected, substandard construction to proceed across the West Loop. Julianne Miller identified these fraudulent certifications in her preliminary audit report dated December 10, 1988. She explicitly noted that she had scheduled a formal meeting with the United States Attorney's Office for Friday, December 15th, the very day after she was abducted. Agent Miller then produced the single most damning physical document recovered during the investigation, the original, yellowed carbon copy of Julianne's confidential preliminary audit memorandum, complete with her handwritten notes in the margins, which had been recovered from the hidden floor safe inside Pendleton's Naperville residence during the February 2026 search warrant execution. Agent Miller, Rodriguez said, holding the yellow document in a protective plastic sleeve before the witness. Where was this document found? It was recovered from a fireproof floor safe concealed beneath the workbench in the defendant's basement workshop in Naperville, Agent Miller testified. It was stored in an envelope marked Huron Street File, 1988. The defendant had kept it for 38 years. The defense table was utterly silent. Jonathan Vance stared down at his desk, his jaw set, unable to object to the admission of a document recovered directly from his client's personal possession under a lawful federal search warrant. Arthur Pendleton sat motionless beside him, his eyes blinking slowly behind his thick lenses, his mask of suburban innocence wearing increasingly thin under the relentless weight of documented facts. However, the climax of the state's case, the evidentiary mountain that the entire prosecution rested upon, arrived on the second week of the trial, when Dr. Eris Thorne returned to the stand to present the complete, unedited forensic analysis of the touch DNA recovered from the tactical cord. Equipped with state-of-the-art 3D molecular modeling software, Dr. Thorne projected a massive, interactive visualization of the 7mm military tactical cord onto the courtroom's central display wall. The display showed the tight, intricate weave of the outer nylon strands, rendered in dark gray, while highlighting the compressed inner core in translucent red. Members of the jury, Dr. Thorne explained, holding a laser pointer up to the screen, what you are viewing is a microcomputed tomography scan of Exhibit 14B, the exact tactical cord used to bind Julianne Miller's wrists on December 14, 1988. As you can see, The exterior surface of the cord shows significant chemical degradation caused by exposure to sodium hypochlorite, household bleach, and mineral spirits, which erased any superficial cellular material on the outer layer. Dr. Thorne zoomed the digital view deep into the center of the primary knot, revealing a cluster of glowing blue spheres embedded tightly between the interwoven fibers. When we untied this knot under sterile laboratory conditions in October 2025, Dr. Thorne continued, his voice filled with quiet scientific authority, we discovered that the inner core of the knot was entirely dry and uncompromised by the liquid chemical wash applied to the exterior. Within that inner core, trapped beneath the immense mechanical tension of the knot itself, we recovered 7 nanograms of nucleated skin cells. And whose nucleated skin cells were trapped inside that knot, Dr. Thorne? Rodriguez asked, her voice ringing clearly across the quiet courtroom. They belong to the defendant, Arthur Pendleton, Dr. Thorne answered firmly. We performed a complete 24-locus short tandem repeat profile, as well as a comprehensive single nucleotide polymorphism array comprising over 800,000 genetic markers. The profile recovered from the interior of that knot matches Arthur Pendleton at every single locus tested. What is the mathematical probability, Rodriguez asked, of finding this exact genetic profile in another individual? The random match probability is calculated at 1 in 11.8 billion, Dr. Thorne stated, looking directly into the eyes of the jurors. It is a mathematical impossibility for these cells to belong to anyone other than Arthur Pendleton. During a grueling 4-hour cross-examination, Jonathan Vance attempted to dismantle Dr. Thorne's conclusions by raising the specter of laboratory error, secondary transfer, and modern software bias. Dr. Thorne, Vance challenged, stepping close to the witness stand, isn't it true that the software used to analyze these degraded samples relies on complex probabilistic genotyping algorithms designed by human programmers who make assumptions about dropout, drop-in, and stutter patterns in small DNA samples? The software utilizes advanced Bayesian statistical models that are fully validated, peer-reviewed, and universally accepted in federal and state courts across the nation, Dr. Thorne responded with absolute composure. Furthermore, the single nucleotide polymorphism array utilized in this case does not rely on simple peak height estimation. It reads full genomic sequencing data. The mathematical certainty in this profile does not depend on algorithmic interpretation. It depends on the physical reality that Arthur Pendleton's biological code is etched into those skin cells. And what about secondary transfer, Dr. Thorne? Vance pressed, his voice rising in dramatic cadence. Could Arthur Pendleton have touched a handrail, a door handle, or a municipal desk in 1988, transferred his skin cells to a police investigator's hand, who then touched that cord during the evidence collection process? Dr. Thorne shook his head slowly. Secondary transfer requires loose, superficial shedding deposited on an exposed surface. It produces extremely low, incomplete, and highly degraded partial profiles. What we recovered from Exhibit 14B was a concentrated, high-density cellular deposit trapped inside the mechanical structure of a knot that was tied under high pressure. Secondary transfer cannot deposit concentrated skin cells inside the locked weave of a knot that has already been tied. The individual who left those skin cells on that cord is the individual who physically tied those knots around Julian Miller's wrists. The cross-examination ended in complete defeat for the defense. Jonathan Vance sat down, his hands shuffling through his papers, while several jurors shook their heads subtly, their eyes fixed on the graying old man at the end of the table. On the 8th day of the trial, the prosecution formally rested its case. The evidentiary picture presented to the jury was staggering in its completeness. A documented municipal corruption scheme, a stolen audit report found in the suspect's personal safe 38 years later, master passkey access to the victim's building through unmonitored service tunnels, and an unassailable 1 in 11 billion genetic match trapped inside the very cord used to execute the crime. As the court adjourned for the afternoon, preparing for the defense's brief presentation of witnesses, Arthur Pendleton was led out of the courtroom by 4 armed Cook County Sheriff's deputies. He moved slowly, his head bowed, the heavy iron waist chains clinking against his belt with every step. The suburban illusion that had shielded him for 38 years was entirely gone, stripped away piece by the unyielding logic of physical blueprints, financial paper trails, and microscopic biological truth. Outside the courthouse, standing beneath the searing summer sun, Marcus Vance stood beside Arthur Miller. The decades of uncertainty that had weighed on both families were finally giving way to the clear, impending dawn of ultimate judicial resolution. The cold case that had haunted Chicago since the dark winter of 1988 was no longer a mystery, no longer an unsolved riddle, and no longer a triumph of evil. The truth had arrived in courtroom 702, and it was preparing to deliver its final, eternal verdict. The defense phase of the trial began on a humid Friday morning in early August, but inside courtroom 702, the atmosphere was as unyielding as a tomb. Jonathan Vance stood at the podium, facing an uphill battle that few defense attorneys in the history of Cook County had ever encountered. The prosecution's scientific, financial, and physical evidence had laid down an iron wall around Arthur Pendleton. To save his 71-year-old client from spending the rest of his natural life behind bars, Vance had only one available legal avenue: create a cloud of reasonable doubt around the aging human beings who handled the evidence long before modern digital logging systems existed. The defense called its primary expert witness, Dr. Harrison Croft, a retired independent forensic pathologist and former medical examiner from Pennsylvania. Dr. Croft, a silver-haired man with 50 years of medical legal experience, took the stand with a heavy leather briefcase. Dr. Croft, Jonathan Vance began, stepping toward the center of the hardwood well. You have reviewed the state crime lab protocols from 1988, the chain of custody logs for Exhibit 14B, and the storage records of Vault Locker 81, correct? I have, Dr. Croft replied, adjusting his reading glasses. In your professional opinion, based on reasonable scientific certainty, can the state guarantee that Exhibit 14B, the tactical cord, was kept in a pristine, uncontaminated environment continuously from December 17, 1988, until October 2025? Absolutes do not exist in 38-year-old cold case physical evidence, Dr. Croft stated, turning his attention to the jury box. In 1988, property room vaults were not clean rooms. They were subterranean storage rooms subject to ambient temperature fluctuations, humidity shifts, and cross-contamination from adjacent evidence boxes. When evidence handlers in the late 1980s and 1990s inspected items, they frequently wore porous latex gloves, touched public door handles, and open paper evidence bags in unfiltered room air. Microscopic skin flakes are airborne particulate matter. They drift, settle, and adhere to surfaces. To claim that a single microscopic cluster of cells found in 2025 definitely arrived on that cord in 1988 ignores 40 years of physical reality. On cross-examination, Senior Assistant State's Attorney Ellen Rodriguez rose slowly from her chair. She walked over to the prosecution table, picked up the small, clear biohazard case containing the replica model of the inner knot, and approached the witness stand. Dr. Croft, Rodriguez said, her voice dropping into a low, measured register. You just testified that microscopic skin flakes are airborne particulate matter that can drift and settle onto evidence boxes. Is that correct? Yes, that is a basic principle of environmental trace dynamics, Dr. Croft answered. If airborne skin cells drift into a storage locker in 1995 and settle on an evidence item, where do they land, Dr. Croft? Do they land on the outside of a sealed paper bag? Typically, yes. If the bag is opened, do they land on the exterior exposed surface of the item inside? Yes. Dr. Croft, Rodriguez continued, raising the clear case holding the knot model directly in front of his face. How does an airborne skin cell, drifting through room air in 1995, manage to penetrate inside a solid, 5-ply braided nylon knot that was pulled tight under 200 pounds of mechanical pressure on December 14, 1988? Does airborne dust possess the physical ability to untie a knot, slip inside the core, and retie the knot around itself? The courtroom was dead silent. Dr. Croft adjusted his collar, clearing his throat into his hand.
Well, no.
Obviously, Airborne particulate cannot enter an already tied knot. Thank you, Dr. Croft, Rodriguez said, turning back toward the prosecution table without missing a beat. No further questions. The defense's attempt to introduce contamination theories crumbled under the basic laws of physics. Sensing the momentum slipping away completely, Jonathan Vance made a high-stakes tactical decision that shocked the gallery and caused the media row to sit up in unison. The defense calls Arthur Pendleton to the stand, Vance announced. A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. It was a desperate move. Putting a 71-year-old accused murderer on the stand in a capital case exposed him to relentless, unrestrained cross-examination by the prosecution. Arthur Pendleton rose slowly from his seat at the defense table. Clad in his oversized charcoal suit, he shuffled across the carpet, stepped into the witness box, placed his trembling right hand on the Bible, and took the oath. His voice was faint, raspy, and fragile as he answered his attorney's preliminary questions. For the first hour of his direct testimony, Vance carefully guided Pendleton through his personal life story, painting a picture of a dedicated public servant, a loving husband, a proud grandfather, and a quiet suburban retiree who spent his days gardening and volunteering. Arthur, Vance asked gently, standing near the jury box, did you kill Julian Miller on the night of December 14th, 1988? Pendleton adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looked directly at the 12 jurors, and shook his head slowly.
No, sir.
I did not. I never laid a hand on that young woman. Did you abduct her from her apartment at 412 West Huron Street?
No.
I was a city inspector. I visited hundreds of buildings. I inspected Huron Street, yes, but I never entered her apartment, and I never took her anywhere. How do you explain the preliminary audit report found in your basement safe in Naperville? Vance asked, addressing the elephant in the room. Pendleton took a slow sip of water from a paper cup, his hands visibly shaking. Back in the late 1980s, the Department of Buildings was chaotic. Pendleton stammered, his voice thin. Inspectors routinely brought home copies of building files, audit notes, and structural plans. I kept an entire filing cabinet of old West Loop project files in my workshop. I never threw away paperwork. When I retired in 2010, I moved those boxes to my safe just to clean out my desk. It wasn't a secret trophy. It was just old municipal clutter that I forgot existed. And the touch DNA found inside the knots of the tactical cord? Vance pressed. I don't know, Pendleton whispered, his eyes moistening behind his lenses. I worked with city contractors, utility crews, and maintenance workers every single day. We shared tools, ropes, gloves, and equipment across job sites in the West Loop. That cord could have been sitting in a municipal truck supply box that I handled weeks before. I don't know how my skin cells got there, but I swear on my grandchildren's lives, I did not murder Julian Miller. Jonathan Vance stepped back. Your witness. Ellen Rodriguez stood up from the prosecution table. She did not rush to the podium. She walked with slow, deliberate authority, carrying a heavy black leather folder. The atmosphere in the courtroom tightened instantly. The soft-spoken, grandfatherly persona that Pendleton had projected for 90 minutes was about to face the relentless pressure of cross-examination. Mr. Pendleton, Rodriguez began, her tone icy, precise, and devoid of sympathy. You just swore under oath that you were a blameless, dedicated public servant who worked for the Department of Buildings for over 25 years. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am, Pendleton answered softly. Rodriguez opened the leather folder, pulling out a set of certified financial documents. In 1988, your official municipal salary as a senior building inspector was $32,400 a year. Is that correct? Yes. In 1988, you maintained a primary checking account at Continental Bank of Chicago. But on March 4, 1987, you opened an account at the Bank of Nova Scotia in the Cayman Islands under the corporate name, Midwest Structural Consulting. Do you recall that account, Mr. Pendleton? Pendleton swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. I don't recall the specific bank details from 40 years ago. Let me refresh your memory, Rodriguez said, stepping close to the witness box and handing him a document. Between March 1987 and November 1988, Cash deposits totaling $64,000 were made into that account. That is more than double your entire annual city salary paid in pure cash. Where did that $64,000 come from, Mr. Pendleton? Pendleton stared down at the paper, his face turning pale. I did private consulting work on weekends. Independent structural advice for developers. Private consulting work? Rodriguez countered instantly, her voice rising sharply. Mr. Pendleton, under Section 2-156 of the Chicago Municipal Code, city building inspectors were strictly prohibited from receiving private compensation from real estate developers operating within their municipal districts. Receiving cash payments from developers you inspected is not consulting. It is illegal bribery and official corruption, isn't it? Jonathan Vance jumped his feet. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness and arguing legal conclusions. Overruled. Judge Harrington declared, watching the witness intently. The witness answered direct questions regarding his character and employment. The state may probe his credibility. Isn't it true, Mr. Pendleton, Rodriguez continued, taking a step closer, that you were running an extortion ring in the West Loop? That you signed off on dangerous structural violations in exchange for cash envelopes delivered to your vehicle? I never compromised safety, Pendleton muttered, his voice losing its calm composure. You never compromised safety? Rodriguez asked, pulling another document from her folder. Let's talk about 412 West Huron Street. On November 28, 1988, Julianne Miller uncovered your shell company, Midwest Structural Consulting. She realized that thousands of dollars in bank funds were being funneled to your offshore account in exchange for fake inspection reports. On December 10, 1988, she typed a formal memorandum naming you personally. And 4 days later, she was dead. Rodriguez leaned over the witness stand, looking directly into Pendleton's eyes. You said you kept that audit memorandum in your basement safe because you were a compulsive archivist who kept old clutter. Is that what you told this jury? Yes, Pendleton whispered. Then explain to this jury, Mr. Pendleton, Rodriguez demanded, her voice ringing across the silent room like a thunderclap, why that specific audit memorandum was the only document in your entire safe that was wiped completely clean of fingerprints, wrapped in archival plastic, and hidden inside a locked steel box beneath your workbench? Why did you keep the exact hit list that identified your corruption? Pendleton froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The frail, grandfatherly facade completely shattered. The courtroom held its breath as the silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Pendleton looked over at his defense attorney, searching for an escape, but Vance sat at the table with his hands clasped, unable to intervene. You kept it, Rodriguez stated, her voice dropping into a devastating, quiet truth, because it was your trophy. You kept it because for 38 years, every time you opened that safe in your manicured suburban house in Naperville, you reminded yourself that you were the smartest man in Chicago. You reminded yourself that you killed a 24-year-old woman, buried her in a boiler room, washed her with bleach, and got away with it. Objection. Jonathan Vance shouted, standing up. Argumentative. Sustained as to the form, Judge Harrington ruled, but the jury will disregard the prosecutor's final characterization. Proceed. Rodriguez turned back to the exhibit easel, pointing to the high-definition image of the tactical cord knot. One final question, Mr. Pendleton, Rodriguez said, her gaze returning to the defendant. You testified today that your skin cells might have gotten onto that tactical cord because you shared tools and ropes in a municipal truck. But Dr. Thorne testified, uncontradicted by any scientific fact, that your skin cells were recovered inside the center of a knot pulled under hundreds of pounds of pressure. Did you lend that tactical cord to a coworker while it was already tied around Julianne Miller's wrists in a Fulton Street boiler room? Pendleton gripped the edges of the wooden witness box, his knuckles turning stark white. His face was flushed, his eyes wild behind his glasses. I don't know how it got there, he yelled, his raspy voice cracking under the pressure. I don't know. No more questions, Your Honor, Rodriguez said calmly, walking back to the prosecution table and taking her seat beside Detective Marcus Vance. The cross-examination was a complete catastrophe for the defense. Pendleton sat stranded in the witness box for a moment, visibly broken, before Judge Harrington quietly instructed him to step down and return to the defense table. He shuffled back to his seat with his head low, avoiding the eyes of the jury, the gallery, and his own legal team. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, the defense officially rested its case. The trial of People versus Arthur Pendleton, 38 years in the making, had reached its absolute legal conclusion. All the witnesses had spoken, all the scientific charts had been displayed, and all the lies had been exposed to the light of day. Judge Harrington turned to the 12 jurors. Members of the jury, we will adjourn for the weekend. On Monday morning at 9 o'clock, you will hear closing arguments from both sides, followed by the court's formal instructions on the law. You will then retire to the jury room to begin your deliberations. Remind yourselves of my standing instruction. Do not discuss this case with anyone, do not consume media coverage, and keep an open mind until the final arguments are concluded. As the court officers instructed the gallery to remain seated while the jury exited, Arthur Miller stood beside his daughter Clara in the second row. He looked across the well at Arthur Pendleton, who was being placed back into wrist restraints by 2 deputy sheriffs. The long journey that had begun in the freezing, dark winter of 1988 on Huron Street was entering its final, decisive hours. The phantom of the West Loop was no longer a ghost haunting the dark alleyways of Chicago. He was a trapped, exposed man sitting in the bright, cold light of a courtroom, waiting for 12 ordinary citizens to hand down his eternal judgment. The humidity hanging over downtown Chicago on the morning of Monday, August 10, 2026, broke just after dawn, replaced by a cool, sharp wind that swept off Lake Michigan and rattled the high double-paned windows of courtroom 702. By 7:30 a.m., long before the oak doors of the George North Layton Criminal Court building officially opened, the sidewalk along South California Avenue was choked with hundreds of citizens, media crews, and legal observers. Inside the courtroom, the silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes the final act of a monumental judicial drama. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Thomas Harrington took the bench. To his left sat the 12 jurors and 4 alternates, their faces grim, composed, and unreadable after 2 grueling weeks of terrifying forensic evidence, complex financial ledgers, and brutal cross-examination. Across the hardwood well, Arthur Pendleton sat slumped at the defense table. He was no longer wearing the charcoal suit from the trial's opening days. He wore a plain gray button-down shirt that hung loosely off his stooped shoulders. The arrogant, calculating composure that had sustained him through 38 years of freedom had entirely vanished, leaving behind a hollowed-out, nervous 71-year-old man who stared fixedly at the polished wood grain of the table. Senior Assistant State's Attorney Ellen Rodriguez rose for the prosecution's closing argument. She walked slowly to the center of the well, standing mere feet from the jury box. In her hands, she carried no notes, no charts, and no exhibits. She simply stood before the 12 citizens who held the ultimate resolution of Case 88 to 9012 in their hands. Members of the jury, Rodriguez began, her voice low, resonant, and carrying an unshakable cadence that commanded the entire room. On December 14, 1988, a bright, courageous 24-year-old woman named Julianne Miller stepped into her apartment on Huron Street, hung up her coat, put her keys in a bowl, and called her mother to talk about Christmas dinner. She was an auditor, a young woman who believed in rules, who believed in facts, and who believed that numbers do not lie. When she discovered that a senior city building inspector was taking cash kickbacks to cover up catastrophic structural hazards in residential high-rises, she did not look the other way. She typed a report. She did her duty. And for that, Arthur Pendleton sentenced her to death. Rodriguez turned slowly, pointing a single finger directly across the courtroom at the defense table. He did not kill her in a fit of rage, Rodriguez declared, her voice rising with controlled power. He killed her with the cold, mechanical precision of an engineer executing a blueprint. He used his municipal master keys to slip through the dark utility tunnels beneath Huron Street, avoiding the front lobby, avoiding the security cameras, and bypassing every defense a young woman thought she had in a locked apartment building. He ambushed her from behind, bound her wrists with military-grade tactical cord, carried her to a subterranean boiler room beneath an abandoned meatpacking warehouse on Fulton Street, and crushed the back of her skull. Rodriguez walked over to the evidence table, picking up the clear, sealed biohazard box containing the dark, knotted nylon tactical cord, Exhibit 14B. The defendant spent 38 years convincing himself that he had committed the perfect crime, Rodriguez said, holding the exhibit high before the jury box. He took gallons of industrial bleach and mineral spirits and scoured that Fulton Street boiler room until the air burned your eyes. He washed her clothing, he scrubbed the gravel floor, and he relocked the outer alleyway door with a rusted padlock. He walked home, had breakfast with his family, and spent the next 38 years tending his rose garden in Naperville, serving on neighborhood boards and enjoying a peaceful, praised retirement. He believed that time had erased his crime. He believed that the winter rain of 1988 had washed away his footprint forever. Rodriguez stepped directly in front of Arthur Pendleton, her voice dropping into a quiet, devastating whisper that echoed through the silent courtroom. But Arthur Pendleton made one fatal mistake, she said. When he tied those knots, when he pulled those cords tight with his own hands to bind Julian Miller's wrists, he pressed his fingers deep into the weave of that nylon. He left 7 nanograms of his skin cells trapped inside the unexposed core of those knots. He locked his own biological signature inside the very instrument he used to execute his victim. He thought he was hiding his secret in the dark. In reality, he was sealing his confession in a microscopic vault, waiting for 38 years until science brought it into the light. Rodriguez walked back to the prosecution table, placing her hands flat on the wood as she faced the jury one last time. The state does not ask you for vengeance. We ask you for truth. The evidence in this case is not a guess. It is not a theory. It is a mathematical certainty of 1 in 11.8 billion. The evidence proves beyond every shadow of a doubt that Arthur Pendleton is a corrupt, calculating, cold-blooded murderer. Bring an end to 38 years of lies. Return a verdict of guilty. When lead defense attorney Jonathan Vance stepped to the podium for his closing argument, he adopted the posture of a defender fighting against an irresistible scientific tide. His voice was urgent, rapid, and strained as he made his final appeal to the jury's duty regarding reasonable doubt. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Vance argued, pacing back and forth before the bench. The state wants you to look at a computer algorithm and suspend your common sense. They want you to take a microscopic sample, 7 nanograms, an invisible speck smaller than a dust mite, and use it to tear down 71 years of an honorable man's life. They talk about 1 in 11 billion, but they cannot tell you with absolute, 100% certainty how those skin cells arrived on that cord over a 38-year period. They cannot disprove secondary transfer during 4 decades of evidence handling in dusty police storage vaults. Arthur Pendleton was a municipal inspector who worked with city utility crews every single day. His tools, his gloves, and his hands touched hundreds of items that were shared across West Loop job sites in 1988. Vance stopped in front of the jury box, gripping the wooden railing with both hands. If there is a single doubt in your mind, a single hesitation about whether those microscopic cells were transferred onto that cord by another worker or carried on an investigator's sleeve during 4 decades of storage, then, under the Constitution of the United States, you must acquit. Do not let modern computer software replace human judgment. Do not condemn an old man based on a phantom particle. At 11:15 a.m., State's Attorney Rodriguez delivered a brief, crushing rebuttal, reminding the jury that secondary transfer could not physically tie a knot from the inside out. At 11:45 a.m., Judge